Today, it's our third new project of the season. We'll start the process of taking a modern Dodge Cummins turbo diesel chassis and adding a classic 1970s Ford four-door crew cab body to it for a modern tow rig with a vintage look. It's all today here on Trucks.
Hey, welcome to Trucks. Well, I know that you guys have seen this tow rig before. This Super Duty has been used to pull around POWERBLOCK project vehicles for the better part of the last decade.
Yeah, and this thing has taken us everywhere and gets worked pretty hard, and frankly gets a little bit abused. Gets used by Ian and Chris, the muscle car guys, and Mike and Joe. And it's been a good truck, but frankly, it's seen better days.
Now this Triton V10 makes good power, but by no means is it a gas saver. When pulling our open trailer, it does all right. But when we hook to our enclosed and hit a few steep grades, well, we could use a little more torque.
Tommy's right. So we thought it was about time for a brand new tow rig. And like you guys already know, for the ultimate in pulling power and long life, well, you want a diesel rig. So that's what we're looking for today. But we're gonna do it with a little bit of style and on a budget. So we made our way back to our friend Monty Lloyd's collection of classic Ford work trucks. And if you remember, he's the guy that supplied us with the body and frame for Das Bronco. And sure enough, Monty had exactly what we were looking for. This F350 XLT Ranger four-door cab with a short bed sitting on the long bed frame. Now, it had faded paint and a little bit of surface rust, but this body was in solid condition, which is kind of rare for these trucks since they were used for work trucks. Now, one minor detail, it didn't have an engine, but that's okay because this was a gas burner and we want a diesel. All the other systems were in fine shape. Southern truck. Now, even the interior, although smelling a tad musty, was in pretty good shape with everything there. Well, almost. And this four-door cab is going to be great for long trips where we go find other trucks projects. Support's in good shape. The battery box isn't rusty.
See anything else in there?
Just mulch. Just mulch. Next, we wanted to double check our research.
What we got?
About 110, 110 and a half.
110 and a half?
Yeah.
We'll leave a couple inch gap for clearance.
154 and a half-ish, right to the center of the hub.
Cool. Remember that.
Yep. Now, we are really seeing some potential with this carcass, because you got to realize, this rust, well, it's only on the surface. This is the original paint. This is a really solid foundation to start on.
Now, we know it's going to be a bunch of hard work, but the fact that we found a mid-70s crew cab, well, it should make a really unique tow rig. Now, we know a lot of you guys out there are stuffing later model diesels down into these older trucks, and we're going to do something along those lines, but with a slight twist. So we got one more stop to make.
So we have made our way down to Certified Auto Recycling in Ardmore, Alabama. And if you remember, the door that we put on the Second Chance Silverado, it came from Certified as well. Look, there's another one. And today, we're going to recycle a diesel drivetrain into our new tow rig. Certified Auto Recycling has in stock almost every single part you could imagine for just about any late model vehicle on the road today. Their sales staff knows their parts, and as well as local deliveries, they also ship internationally.
We get a lot of customers that want to save money and use a used part on their vehicle, because then a new one doesn't have to be produced. That saves energy, and it saves the customer a lot of money.
In case you're wondering where all those parts come from, well, they started out as complete vehicles that were total losses bought from an insurance company auction. Each vehicle is methodically and carefully dismantled piece by piece. As much as 90% of these vehicles are recycled. And trust me, they don't sit around long. They become parts for your vehicle quick.
Now, these guys have hundreds and hundreds of clean and complete late model engines, foreign and domestic. Now, we've seen Duramax and Cummins and Power Stroke diesels, as well as almost any gas engine you can think of. Take a look at this 24-valve Cummins. We thought about going with something like this. This thing's clean, ready to crate and ship.
Yeah, it looks practically brand new. And when Certified dismantles a vehicle, they take a lot of care with the multi-pin plugs. They just don't start tearing stuff apart. They even cap the inlets and outlets of the water pump, the turbo, and the oil lines. And that way, when it ships, nothing gets inside your engine.
Now, just like engines, these guys have transmissions in any flavor you want. Front-wheel drive, rear-wheel drive, manual or automatic, 2- or 4-wheel drive. Now, take a look at this one. This is something similar to what we want to use, a heavy-duty manual transmission for our new tow rig.
Now, even though these vehicles don't sit around very long, Certified's inventory is updated on a daily basis with a wide variety of both foreign and domestic vehicles. As a matter of fact, while we were there, a whole new shipment of trucks was arriving.
So we did some snooping around and waded through the sea of vehicles waiting to be dismantled. We found something that really caught our eye, and it's not this thing. Well, it did catch our eye, it's just not what we're after.
Now, believe it or not, this 97 2500 series 3/4 ton just came in off the truck. Nothing on it has been processed, and everything that we saw that we liked on the inside, well, it's all right here on one truck.
And with this truck being a 97, that means it's got the old school 12-valve Cummins. So that means it's got the mechanical injection setup. And with less electronics to deal with, well, the swap is less complicated and a little bit more budget friendly. Now these 12 valves, well, they make great power right out of the box, but they can easily be modified for more. Now the radiator and the AC condenser all look to be in great shape. I think we got a good candidate here.
Now this right here, this is why this truck totaled. There's some pretty serious sheet metal damage and 157,000 miles, which is nothing for this drivetrain. It's just getting broke in. But right here, we've got severe suspension damage since the wheels stuffed into the cab. But it's still perfect for what we want it for. And we want to make a point right here and now that Certified does not sell complete vehicles. They are bending the rules big time for us, so we can take this back home as a unit and show you how much time and money that Certified Auto Recycling can save you by dismantling right here on site.
Up next, we'll start tearing our trucks apart. And later,
Now with the body separated from the rest of the frame, yo, I think we're at the point of no return.
You will get a truck on the new truck.
oh wow. Stay tuned.
Hey, welcome back to Trucks. Well, we drug our treasure back here to the shop, and we can't wait to get started on our new project. And like we talked about before, there's plenty of guys that are putting the Cummins turbo diesel into a Ford truck, old or new. And we had decided right from the start that we wanted a diesel drivetrain in our tow rig, just for the reliability of it, as well as the extra foot-pounds of torque.
But like we told you guys, we wanted to do something a little bit different. And it's an idea I'm sure a lot of you guys have had at one time or another. Taking a vintage body and plopping it down on a later model chassis. Because let's face it, this 97 Dodge, well, it's benefited from 20+ years of technology in comparison to that old Ford. It's got a partially boxed frame, a good strong drivetrain, as well as modern suspension and brakes, not to mention the aftermarket support in the form of upgrades. So we thought we'd head down that road and see what it takes to drop that classic Ford body down on a newer Dodge frame.
Now, like you guys already know, every solid project starts with a good plan. And a little bit of research tells us that this long bed, extended cab Dodge is 154 3/4-inch wheelbase. Now, the club cab short bed Ford is 155 inches. They're almost identical, and that is going to make this body swap even easier.
Yeah, because we're going to have enough work just to get everything in the cab functioning. But by matching up the wheelbase, well, at least we don't have to deal with shortening or lengthening the frame, drive shaft, exhaust system, wiring harness, or fuel lines. And that'll minimize the amount of time it takes to get this project up and running.
Our F-350 body is a 1979, the same year as Das Bronco. But That doesn't mean that you're stuck with this front end styling, because the fact is these fenders are the same from 1973 right on up to 1979. So you've got lots of options if you want to restyle the front end of your truck. Now, despite the fact that our 30-year-old Ford is a little rusty, we had no real issues with disassembly.
Now, we weren't just hacking things up to speed up the teardown process, because we weren't sure what parts we were going to need off either body or either chassis. Now, even though it's just the cab left, it is still plenty heavy, and you need to be careful with your lift arm or jack placement so you don't bend anything or lose a toe.
Now, with the right front wheel being stuffed into the cab, we kind of had our suspicions about maybe a slight bit of frame damage. But despite all of that, this truck runs great and pulled itself under the lift, no problem.
Now, disassembling our Dodge was a little bit easier because it's 20 years newer. The removal of the bed was pretty straightforward.
Now, we're also going to reuse our diesel fuel lines because that is going to save us money down the road.
At this point, we're not sure how much of the original Dodge wiring harness we're going to keep, so we're disconnecting instead of cutting.
Up next, it's the right way to evacuate your AC system. And later, we'll show you what our cool new tow rig's gonna look like. Stick around.
Welcome back to the shop. We're tearing down our wrecked Dodge diesel, and we got to deal with the AC system before we go any further. That requires some specialized equipment we just don't have.
Now, since we obviously couldn't drive our wrecked truck to the service center, Jason Sanders from our local Ford dealer was kind enough to bring his reclaimer by and properly evacuate the 134A refrigerant from our truck's system, since we got to separate the cab from the rest of the drivetrain. And believe me, an hour's worth of labor, it's definitely worth what that costs to properly do this and not just release it into the atmosphere. That way, the penguins, they stay cold. The system is hooked up to the high and low side service valves. Then the refrigerant is withdrawn from our system, filtered, and placed into a storage tank. That way, it can be recycled later on into another vehicle.
Build on a budget. Truck projects that save you time and money.
Now, obviously, we've got a pretty big job ahead of us with our tow rig body swap project. And we have noticed that with our Cummins turbo diesel engine, well, every time we leave it sitting in one certain spot for any amount of time, it kind of marks the floor. Now, what's leaking is the rear main seal. But with all the work that we still need to do on this project, we're going to have to postpone getting that fixed. Now, the seal itself, it's not going to cost you that much, but the 6 to 8 hours that it's going to take to replace that seal, well, that's what's going to bite you. So if you've got a similar leak in your vehicle and you don't have that 6 to 8 hours, or you don't have that several $100s that a shop is going to charge you to replace that seal, well, here's an option. Now, we all know bars leaks for stopping radiator leaks, but now they make this additive that will condition seals and, according to them, will stop a rear main seal from seeping. It's designed to be used with all types of seals, including rope, two-piece, and one-piece seals. And Bars Leak says it works by simply adding it every time you change your oil. When it comes in contact with a seal, it expands it, restoring its sealing capability. It's non-foaming, non-corrosive, and non-clogging, and compatible with every different oil type, including synthetic. So depending on your oil leak, rear main seal repair may just be the easiest and most cost-effective seal repair available. All right. This is ridiculous.
We drop bills on them.
Hey, welcome back to Trucks. Now, with the body separated from the rest of the frame, yo, I think we're at the point of no return.
You will get a truck on the new truck.
I'm too hot for TV, y'all better best band me now. Even a blind man can see that I'm Grammy bound. Oh, few thought I couldn't stand my ground. That's a huge loss. They wish they had me now. I blow green, never hand me brown. Flow mean the whole beat.
All right, now back to reality, and quick. Now, we wanted to take a minute and show you guys what we had envisioned in our minds when we dreamed up this project. We want to take our 97 Dodge chassis, add our Ford short bed, the cool-looking four-door crew cab, and top it off with that classic Ford front end.
And of course, bathe it in a slick coat of paint, but keep the factory two-tone that we think looks pretty good on the truck. Maybe change it to a blue and white.
Yeah, and since it's a two-wheel drive, I lower it down a little bit. Now, that was easy enough, but now we actually have to do the work.
Might be a little easier without 20 pounds of bling. What do you think?
I think so. I think it's time to go.
I think I could pawn this. Now, you may have noticed that behind that big Cummins turbo diesel is a 5-speed. Believe it or not, the 5-speed version of this truck is actually rated at 35 more horsepower and 20 more pound-feet of torque. So the 5-speed is staying. We think it's going to be a little more durable for towing, too. But the NV4500 series transmission has some fifth-gear issues, and we'll address that later on. And we're not scrapping the rest of this cab, either. These seats, they're comfortable, and there's nothing wrong with them. The center console's nice, too. We're going to use the gauge pod for engine communication, and who knows, we might even try and stuff this whole dash in our vintage Ford truck, because this truck came with something our Ford truck never did, and that is good cup holders.
Now, if you've got any questions about this thing or anything else you saw on today's show, go to PowerBlockTV.com. Hey guys, thanks for watching Trucks. See you next week.
Today, the Body Snatchers are back on our diesel tow rig body swap project. We'll get our 97 Dodge's frame straightened out, then we'll do a simple hub and axle swap to make it a dually. It's all today here on Trucks.
Hey, welcome to Trucks. Today, we're back on our diesel tow rig project. We're in the process of stripping parts off it so we can transplant some of this stuff into our classic Ford. To give you guys an idea on where this project got started, check this out. We found the truck we wanted at Certified Auto Recycling, but it wasn't perfect.
But right here, we've got severe suspension damage since the wheels stuffed into the cab.
And even with the damage, well, it had everything else we needed for the basis of our next project.
And when this truck was wrecked, there's a combination of sheet metal, suspension, and even a little bit of frame damage. So we've shipped our chassis to Gerald's Auto Body to have it straightened. And we're going to show you guys a little bit of insight as to what it takes to repair one of these heavy-duty frames sitting underneath these trucks.
And while he's there, I'm going to head back down to Certified, pick up a few more parts that ought to help with the stability of our tow rig when dragging our enclosed trailer.
Gerald Martin started his first body shop in 1977 and has been continually growing the business ever since. The current location is 10,000 square feet with 17 employees and state-of-the-art equipment. So if you remember, Gerald's Auto Body is the shop that gave us the estimate for our second chance Silverado to work from. So we got our big Dodge locked down to this state-of-the-art frame rack, and we're going to pull this dude back into spec. Now, we've got alignment equipment back at the shop, but our little mighty pull is in no way strong enough to do a boxed frame like this one. Like we showed you before, the wheel was stuffed back up under the cab, and it kind of drug the suspension with it. Gerald's frame technician, Greg, has been working on this a little bit, and he's pulled the kink out of the frame, but the lower control arm is still back, and the radiator support tab is still back a little bit. Now, we're going to get to see some cool metal moving around, but what's really fascinating here is just how precise and accurate a laser alignment system like this is. With the laser scanner placed under a perfectly level frame, it measures that frame 3 times a second and transfers that data to a computer. The software contains measurements and specs for every single manufactured vehicle, including our big Dodge. There are also points on the frame that are measured by the laser and compared to factory specs for proper realignment. That's accomplished by hanging flags from those strategic points and feeding the information via the laser back into the software. However much the flags move during a pull tells the computer how much adjustment has been made and how much further you need to pull. The software even shows you detailed pictures where to hang your flags from the frame. Once the flags have been identified by the laser, we're ready to start our pull. And this machine doesn't play, with over 10,000 psi of hydraulic pulling pressure. With the system measuring at 3 times a second, Greg has instant feedback that he can monitor during the pull. He can actually watch the measurements change on the screen as he's straightening the frame. Now, just like you've seen us do, Greg is tapping on the frame while it's under pressure. This relieves stress. Patience is very important when pulling and aligning frames, and Greg Greenhaw has almost 20 years of experience in frame alignment. With the incredible amounts of force and pressure at play here, safety is an obvious concern, and a pull like this is better left to professionals like Gerald's Auto Body.
At home, you hadn't got nothing like that to pull with. You know, people use come-alongs with trees and tractors and everything else, but, you know, when you're putting 7, 8, 10,000 pounds of pressure to it, that's a whole lot, and you got to have something that really hold it.
Now check it out, that is actually a link from one of these pull chains that came apart under a previous technician's pull. Well, Greg likes to leave it there as a bit of a souvenir. The fact is that these box frames are some of the strongest out there and the most difficult to pull in a line. But what Greg taught us is that if your pull chains are straight and not twisted, well, it's safer, less likely for that to happen, and you get a more accurate pull. Safety chains in place, well, that stuff is just what experience teaches you. Now, thanks to Gerald's Auto Body in Pulaski, Tennessee, we can catch up with Ryan back at Certified.
Now, the reason I made the trip back down here to Certified Auto Recycling is so we could change our 2500 Dodge Ram from a single rear wheel axle to a dually setup. Now, we know we're not going to change the load carrying capacity of our truck unless we change the leaf springs, but this wider dually axle will give us a lot more stability, which comes in especially handy when towing our enclosed trailer. Now, take a look at this axle. It's nice and clean. Even the rotor and the brake pads look usable. Now, luckily for us, our truck is a 2-wheel drive, but if you guys are swapping this dually axle into a 4-wheel drive, make sure you match up your ring and pinion ratio, or else you're going to be doing a ring and pinion swap. Now, this dually axle is huge, but there's one more piece of the puzzle. Now, here's what's on our truck right now. And if we tried to bolt a dually wheel to this, well, we'd have major interference problems. So what we're here to get is the hub spacers that'll change the offset of the wheel and give us plenty of clearance for our brake parts. That way we can run the same spare tire at all 4 corners of our truck. Now, we've been down here picking up plenty of truck parts, but whether you need a window regulator for your minivan, a wheel for your daily driver, or just a radio for your grocery getter, well, Certified Auto Recycling is the place to call. Let me get this stuff loaded up. I'm gonna hit the road.
Up next, from the front to the back, we'll convert our truck to a dually. And later, it's an easy drum brake upgrade and overhaul. Stick around.
Hey, welcome back. Well, thanks to our Cundall crane, this featherweight engine and transmission dropped right back into place on our newly straightened frame. We just want to say thanks to Greg and all the guys at Gerald's Auto Body.
Now, Certified had a bunch of options for us, but here's what we ended up coming home with. This is a Dana 80 out of a 97 dually with 354 gears, which should give us a reasonable highway cruise RPM and decent fuel economy. Now, this drum brake axle is a little bit cheaper than the disc brake axle we showed you earlier. And since our original truck had drums, well, it should drop right in without any modifications. As far as stopping power goes, well, we got a cheap upgrade to help these drums work a little bit better. Now, unlike the separate rotor and wheel spacer assembly we showed you earlier, well, this is an integrated unit. The rotor seems to be in pretty good shape. While we're installing them, well, we might as well throw in some fresh bearings, grease, and a couple new seals. Now, while we were down there, we also picked up a set of dually tires and wheels. While they look a little rough right now, well, they won't when we're done. We'll get them all cleaned up, hit them with some fresh paint. They ought to look like new. Now, as for the tires, well, they're gonna hit the trash pile in favor of some more highway-friendly rubber.
Now, one of the best things about switching over to a dually system is that all 6 wheels and tires can be rotated, really increasing your tire lifespan. Now, teardown's pretty straightforward. We'll pull a spindle nut and get the calipers safely out of the way. Like everything else on this truck, these things are heavy.
Now, we could have thrown these parts on like they were, but we thought we'd take a few minutes, throw them in the blast-it-all cabinet, and get them ready for a fresh coat of paint. And we also wanted to throw in a new set of wheel bearings. Now, driving the old races out, we could use a regular old chisel, but on the installation of the new races, we need to use a brass drift. That way you don't damage the surface of your new race. And you'll know when you've got them fully driven in, because you'll get a solid metal-on-metal feel. Then it was time to make them look new again. And we did that by spraying on a fresh coat of semi-gloss paint from Duplicolor. And since I was a bit lazy and didn't mask off what I didn't want to paint, I used some brake clean to wipe off the rotor surface so we didn't gum up our brake pads. After that, we installed our freshly packed wheel bearings and a couple of new grease seals. That way, the brakes and our wheel bearings on the front end of our Dodge ought to be in good shape for quite a while.
Now, a little bit of axle grease on the spindle is just good insurance. And make sure you carefully install the hub so you don't damage the seal on the sharp threaded end. The hub gets followed by the pre-packed outer wheel bearing, the washer, and then the spindle nut gets torqued to spec and then backed off 1/8 of a turn, then finally locked in place with a cotter pin. Now, because of the depth of the spindle nut inside the dually hub, it can be a little tricky to put a cotter pin in. What we ended up doing was trimming a longer cotter pin down and installing it with needle nose pliers. We reused the original dust cap, tapping it in gently with a screwdriver and a soft face hammer.
Now, the single rear wheel axle we pulled out is also a Dana 80. And we're going to keep it around just in case we can find another use for it in a project down the road.
Now, swapping the axle assemblies is pretty straightforward and can be done with basic tools, but we've gotten pretty used to our overhead crane.
Hey, welcome back to the shop. Well, now that we've got our diesel tow rig project converted to a dually, we want to pay attention to some maintenance issues before we go any further. So we're going to pull these gigantic drums off our newly acquired axle, see what kind of shape the brakes are in. Now, the axle we picked up had a few miles on it, and it's well used. You guys know, sometimes getting these drums off can be a real bear. It's frozen.
Doesn't feel that cold.
Now, our brake drum had almost fused itself to the hub face. So with the use of some penetrating oil and a few more light taps from the hammer, we were able to break it free. But the shoes were still holding it up, so we had to take a different approach. All right, there's the lock lever. Just roll the star wheel down. If we collapse those shoes enough, we can get this drum off. Ah, that's better. Jeez. Now, they do make specialized brake spring pliers to help remove the springs and retainers, and they do come in handy. But you can get by with just a couple of screwdrivers and a couple of pairs of pliers. And I know it looks a little intimidating with so much going on in here, but a good tip is to do one side at a time. That way you can use the completely assembled side as a reference. Now, along with our brake shoes and drums, we also picked up a hardware kit. So we're going to be replacing some of the springs, but it's a really good idea to keep track of all the parts you remove. With the shoes loose, all that's left is removing the park and brake lever assembly from the rear shoe. If you lose the little E-clip here, well, don't spend too much time looking for it. There should be one in the hardware kit.
Build on a budget. Truck projects that save you time and money.
Now, we had to replace our shoes and drums just because they were worn out. But here's a great, cheap upgrade for you guys that drive full-size Dodges with drum brake axles that you can do whether your shoes need to be replaced or not. What we're going to do is replace the Dodge wheel cylinder with a 1-ton GM wheel cylinder. It's got a slightly larger bore diameter. It's going to put more pressure on the shoes against the drums when you hit the pedal, stopping your truck faster. And the best part about it, these wheel cylinders, they only cost about 12 bucks each. And it's the best way you can make your drum brake axle stop more like a disc brake axle, just a lot cheaper. Hey, thanks for sticking around. Well, we've got our new GM wheel cylinders installed. We're ready to move on with the rest of the brake shoe installation. But before you throw the new shoes on, go ahead and clean the contact points in between the shoes and the backing plate and lubricate them with some Loctite anti-seize. Now, if you're working on drum brakes and you disassemble both sides and you don't have one side to look at as a reference, well, All Data DIY is a great resource for step-by-step instructions on how to do almost anything on a particular vehicle. And I'm sure if you're doing this job without the specialized brake spring pliers, well, it takes a little bit of extra patience. Now, each spring does a specific job and goes in a specific location. So make sure you get it right. You're just going to give yourself brake issues down the road. And some of these springs are under a pretty fair amount of pressure, so just be aware of that. And with the springs and shoes installed, we're almost ready to throw the drums on. But before we do that, we're going to make sure the self-adjusting mechanism and star wheel spins freely and works properly. This should be a good starting spot. Now, most rotors and drums come with a sprayed-on coating on the friction surface, and that's there to prevent corrosion or rust while they're sitting on the parts store shelf. So you need to make sure you remove it all before you install the parts. Otherwise, you'll be riding down the road with your brakes smoking, looking like they're on fire. Ask me how I know. Now we're ready to install the drum, but you can't just throw it on there and call it done. You need to have a slight interference fit between the drum and the shoes. It's a little too loose. Now, to expand the shoes, well, you just rotate the star wheel the only way it'll let you. There we go. Just a light, little bit of drag. That's all you want. Now, if you have any questions about anything else you saw on today's show, go to PowerBlockTV.com. Guys, thanks for watching. See you next week.
Today, we're back at work on our diesel dually body swap. We'll mount our 79 Ford bed and cab on our 97 Dodge frame. Then we'll move the engine back just enough to make everything fit. It's all today here on Trucks.
Hey, welcome to Trucks. Well, today we're back on Project Super Dually, which really started out as a discussion between me and Ryan talking about how much we wanted a diesel tow rig to pull our projects around and take them to payoffs and even go get new trucks to work on. But we did not want to spend $50,000 or more buying a brand new one, because this is Trucks and we can build one and save money doing it. We both really like the styling of these mid-70s Fords, so this is what started it all off.
But as much as we like the look of that old truck, well, we didn't want to be stuck with 70s era engineering. We wanted more modern suspension, steering, and brakes. So rather than swap a diesel engine into that old Ford, well, we thought we'd replace the whole chassis with this one out of a 97 Dodge. It's complete with a Cummins turbo diesel engine and heavy-duty manual 5-speed transmission.
Now, we didn't just randomly grab the first diesel truck frame that we came across at the recycler. The fact is that we did a bunch of research and found that this 97 Dodge extended cab long bed frame is less than an inch difference in wheelbase than our crew cab short bed Ford, making them perfect for a body swap. We did some upgrades, and if you've been watching the shows, you know that we used a Dana 80 axle along with the dually front hubs, giving us 6 interchangeable wheels, true dually form. Now, unlike the Ford, check this frame out. Ford is regular C-channel and just a straight beam. This one steps down 2 different times, so we're kind of tied to this upper length right here. Unless, of course, we want to channel the bed, but that's going to sacrifice cargo room and is way too much work for what we want to accomplish. So the bed is tied to sitting down here. So our plan is to center the wheel arches with the axle right here and then build the rest of the truck from the bed forward. Sway a little bit. Okay, the Ford bed is not going to bolt onto the Dodge frame. We've got a couple of issues. The first one being this tab right here. We want this cross brace to sit right on the top of the frame rail, so we got some trimming to do right here.
Now, the other problem we have is this front bed mount. While it looks okay now, once we get that little riser tab cut off the back of the bed and it lowered down, well, this is going to need to be lowered as well. And since we got it cut off and we're going to be moving it around anyway, well, we might as well have it line up with the existing Ford bed mounting location.
Now, mocking up and fitting the body of this truck is actually the fun part, because you can't really make a mistake since the chassis is dictating where the bed goes, and we're building it from the rear to the front. Now, a plasma torch will save you some time, but you can achieve the same results with a cutoff wheel, and a little martial arts practice, too.
Yeah. Now, the plasma cutter leaves a little bit of a rough edge, so we're using a flap wheel to grind down any sharp spots, as well as hit the top side of the frame rail, because that's where we'll be welding in our new bed mount. And after taking a quick measurement, all we had to do was trim a little bit off the factory mount. And reusing the factory mount saves us a whole lot of time and frustration trying to fabricate a new one. Now, once we had our mount modified, all we had to do was flip it around so it was facing inward as opposed to facing outward on the Dodge setup, and it lined right up with the factory Ford mount. Then we just cranked up our welder and burned it in. All right, now we got the bed pretty much where we want it, but we're not going to bolt it down just yet. We want to leave it loose to have a little bit of adjustability. Now we can start working our way forward, move on to the cab. Now, what we're doing for the cab is essentially the same thing we're doing for the bed. We're going to utilize an existing portion of the body mount bracket, but this time it's going to be in conjunction with the Dodge body mount bushing, because you need to isolate the cab from any chassis vibration. Now, we'll cut this bracket off, cut it to length, and utilize the existing Ford body mount location.
Now, to mount the body to the frame up front, we kind of got lucky. Look at our brackets. The factory Ford cab mount is right above the factory Dodge frame mount. So we can get creative with the welder and the plasma cutter, build a pedestal that utilizes the Ford isolator, and we'll bolt right up. We'll box it and gusset it for strength.
Ready?
Yep.
Hand me that cab. All right, with the body mount bushing in place, looks like we need a mount that's only 2 1/4 inches tall.
With the cab sitting where it's supposed to be, it looks like we've got about 6 inches between the cab mount and the frame mount. Okay, we've got 6 inches from the top of the isolator to right there. Trim that dude, build it up. Now, these mounts are actually from the original Ford chassis, which we cut off before we scrapped the frame. Now, ultimately, this is just a mock-up, and this mount will be boxed in for strength later on.
All right, drop down again.
Now, using the original bolt locations in the Ford cab is really a shortcut because dropping the bolt through helps us center and locate where the new mounts need to be.
Up next, we're moving our motor mounts back and making a new transmission crossmember. And later, it's U-joint replacement made easy. Stay tuned.
Uh-oh. Fail. Hey, welcome back to Trucks.
Now, just like we figured we would, we've got a major clearance issue between the mechanical fan, that wire, and our radiator core support. And not only that, well, we've got ½ foot between the back of the cylinder head and the firewall. So we've got plenty of room to set the engine back. And that'll give us the clearance we need up front, but it'll also help us with the shifter location of our manual transmission. So if we just set it back a few inches, we still won't have to deal with lengthening or shortening the wiring harness or the fuel lines.
And you got to remember, on top of the radiator and condenser, we've got a honking fat intercooler to go in front of here. So setting the engine back, it's a must. But don't worry, because we got a plan.
And here's what we're gonna do. Our truck obviously has a manual transmission, but the trucks that came equipped with automatics have shorter drive shaft due to the differences in overall transmission case length. This one's shorter than the manual transmission version by just over 5 inches. We'll use that measurement to dictate how far we set the engine back. And once we swap the inputs over, well, this drive shaft will drop right in.
Measuring 5 1/8 inches back from the original engine mounts, we're making another reference mark, which will serve as a guide to relocate the engine mounts to their new home. Now, the right-hand frame rail is notched to make room for the air conditioning compressor. Now, since we're moving the engine back, well, that relief has to be moved back as well, which is fairly simple. Now, following the original notch, we'll just extend it back about 6 inches, box it in, and weld it up, which will retain the original frame strength.
Dodge made sure these mounts weren't gonna budge. We used a plasma cutter, cutoff wheel, and an air hammer to try to remove them, and nothing worked, except for Kevin. Cool, is it hot?
That wasn't that hard.
I don't know what took so long.
I don't know.
Now, so we wouldn't lose our mark when we grind this paint away to weld in the mounts, I went ahead and scribed the line with a cutoff wheel. That way, we won't lose track of where we are.
Now, the engine mounts didn't magically change color. We threw them in the bead blaster to get rid of all of the paint, because at this stage, a contaminated weld is the last thing that we want.
Now, just like the body mounts, we wanted to utilize as much of the factory Dodge hardware as possible. And now that the crossmember sits about 5 inches too far forward, well, we had to cut up the factory crossmember and use the outer pieces that bolt to the frame rail and the inner section that bolts to the transmission.
You good?
Yep. Yes, fell right in place. And once we had the center of the crossmember bolted to a new transmission mount we got from O'Reilly's, it was just a matter of modifying the ends of the crossmember so we could get a nice clean installation. We connected everything using some 1/8-inch plate. And once we had one side done, we just had to make sure it was level before we finished it up.
One more. Tell me when.
That's good.
Hey, Hey, welcome back to Trucks. Well, we got our engine mounts burned in, as well as some additional gussets underneath and on the backside. So we're pretty confident that these are going to hold up that more than 1,000 pounds of engine and transmission. Over here, we've got a relief cut boxed in, so now we have room for our AC pump, and the rear crossmember is fully assembled. So we're ready to drop in this engine and transmission, and we're almost ready to throw in our new drive shaft. Almost.
Build on a budget. Truck projects that save you time and money.
All right, but before we install the new to us shorter drive shaft, there's a couple of things we need to take care of. First off, like we told you, we got to swap over the drive shaft input from our old shaft onto the replacement. That way it'll plug right into the back of our NV4500 manual transmission. We also want to throw in a fresh set of U-joints, because this used drive shaft that we picked up, well, who knows how many miles are on it or what kind of shape those U-joints are in. Now, a little spray lube can go a long way in helping you remove the stubborn C-clamps that hold the U-joint in place. And to dislodge the U-joint caps, well, it just takes a few medium blows on the yoke. Don't hit the seal surface of the input or the area directly around the U-joint cap. And with the cap removed, you can clearly see some contamination in the grease and the needle bearings. And at this point, it's pretty obvious this drive shaft has seen some miles. It could use a fresh set of U-joints. And to make sure we don't distort the area where the cap slides in, we use a piece of scrap tubing to drive the cap out. Now, some U-joints are sealed and non-serviceable, like the factory Dodge U-joints. But some, like this one, have a hole drilled and tapped for a grease fitting. Now, that's a plus because you're going to get a longer service life, but it's also a potential weak point. As the transmission yoke spins and tries to turn the drive shaft, you want to index the joint so the hole is under compression. If you install it like this, as the transmission yoke spins, it's going to try to pull that hole apart, creating a potential weakness and possibly leaving you stranded on the side of the road. For installation, that same piece of scrap tubing comes in handy again to seat the U-joint in the drive shaft yoke. And when installing the caps onto the cross, you need to make sure the needle bearings don't fall to the bottom of the cap. Now, in the past, I've used this socket to seat the cap, but I thought a better solution would be to weld a bolt, nut, and washer together and make my own handy little tool. It's a lot better than tearing up expensive tools. All right, now don't forget, you might lose a little bit of grease out of the universal joint during installation. So once you get your Zerk fittings tightened down, go ahead and pump a few shots of grease in them. You'll be ready for installation.
Hey, welcome back to Trucks. I'm gonna try this again. That's a little better. It's better. Let's get this thing bolted out.
Well, now that engine fits like a glove, and we didn't even have to trim any sheet metal in the engine bay to get such a great fit either. But some parts are going to go away, like this vacuum-powered brake booster that came on this old Ford. We're going to replace it with the Dodge system that gets its pressure from the power steering pump.
And we thought we were going to have to get rid of this apartment-sized heater housing, but the good news is it actually fits. And if we clock our turbo down a little more, well, we'll have even more clearance. But here's the most important thing we got today. Look here. We've got room for the radiator and condenser. And since the Ford grill comes out so far, we can even put an intercooler up here, even room for an upgrade.
Now, there's an added bonus for moving the drivetrain back about 5 inches. Check out the shifter handle. This thing wound up in the perfect spot. We should have plenty of clearance between it and our center console. We're miles away from the dash. Now, speaking of dashes, Kevin and I kicked around the idea of swapping the entire Dodge dash into this old Ford. But after taking some measurements, well, we realized it was going to be a ton of work. But we are going to swap the clusters, because after taking them out, well, we realized they're almost identical in size. And to get them to work, well, we'll just use the existing Dodge wiring, make up a couple of brackets. This thing ought to sit right in here. All right, well, we're pretty happy with the way this Ford body set down on the Dodge chassis. And the next time you see this truck, we're going to make some more progress on it. Now, if you got any questions about any products we used on today's show, go to PowerBlockTV.com. Thanks for watching, Trucks. See you in a week.
Today, we're tweaking our 5.9 Cummins to make more power for Project Super Dually. And we're gonna show you how to take care of the killer dowel pin. It's all today here on Trucks.
Hey guys, welcome to Trucks. Well, if you're following this project along, well then you know that this is the body for our Project Super Dually, a 79 Ford four-door cab that we're dropping down on a 97 Dodge chassis. And as much as I'm chomping at the bit to get started on a cool paint scheme for this truck, well the truth is we're just not ready to start the body work. However, we have had the body on and off of the chassis several times, making up body mounts and figuring out that we needed to set our engine and transmission back a good 5.5 inches. Well, we took care of that problem, but it created another problem, typical hot rodding. Now, the turbo comes into contact with the heater housing. Well, we want to keep this heater housing because we're also keeping the stock heater controls inside the cab. Well, we think we've got this figured out, and it may be easier than you think, and it won't cost a dime.
That's because what we plan on doing is taking this exhaust manifold and simply turning it over. That way the turbo will sit just a little bit higher in the engine bay, and hopefully it will give us the clearance we need between the turbo and the heater box. That way we can keep it. Now, to make sure the turbo's oil feed and return line are in the right place, well, we're just going to index the front half of the turbo. That way they'll be in the correct location. Now, if you guys don't really like wrenching on a late model truck, just due to the overly complex nature of all the underhood electronics, and you'd rather tinker with an older truck with a carburetor just for simplicity, well, you need to take a look at some of these early model diesels. You can make all sorts of adjustments and changes to get these things to run just like you want. You can control how much fuel gets dumped into the engine before the turbo spool up. You can limit the amount of turbo boost you make, and you can extend the RPM range in which these things make power just by turning a few screws and swapping some springs out. Now, these early 5.9 Cummins can easily put down 300 or 400 horsepower and 600 or 700 pound-feet of torque to the wheels and still retain its daily drivability. Plus, you got enough power underneath your right foot to tow a gigantic trailer down the street and still get 20 miles per gallon out on the highway. Unloaded, of course. So today, we're going to show you how to unleash some of that power. Now, luckily for us, the exhaust manifold ports are symmetrical, so it's just a matter of flipping the exhaust manifold over. And short of relocating a couple of brackets, well, there aren't going to be any drawbacks to doing this. Now, to get our turbo to sit correctly on the exhaust manifold, we need to remove a little bit of metal. Now, we don't want to get too carried away here because this manifold gets really, really hot and we don't want to create any weak points. We use the same treatment on the turbo housing itself. And with that done, we'll blow out all the metal shavings. Then it's just a matter of clocking the front half of our turbo so everything lines up. Just be careful around the impeller blades. You don't want to break them.
Now, before we get carried away with our power upgrades, there's something that we need to check. You guys that are familiar with the 5.9 Cummins, what you know about the killer dowel pin. Basically, there's a dowel pin that's pressed into the block that locates the timing cover case. Now, this thing can work its way loose over time and can cause you some serious heartache. Now, if you're unbelievably lucky, the killer dowel pin will just fall to the bottom of the engine and you'll never know it. So that's when you pack up and head to Vegas. Now, this job is still easy to do with the body on the vehicle, but you do have to remove the fan shroud and the clutch fan. All right, what do we got? Now, this is what you're looking for. You can see the dowel pin starting to work its way out of the case. This guy is evil, especially when he gets loose.
Now, you can imagine the consequences if this pin falls out. If you're lucky, it falls right down in that hole, falls to the bottom of the case, like Kevin said. But more than likely, it's going to get grabbed by this gear and forced in between the gear and the timing case, creating a big hole right here and a massive leak. And if you're really unlucky, well, it's going to fall all the way down to the bottom, get stuck in between the crank and the cam gears, cause big, big trouble.
Now, for all the havoc that little guy can wreak, the fix is unbelievably simple. All you need to do is make a tab that fits under this bolt and holds the killer dowel pin in place permanently. Now, a quick internet search will lead you to a couple of kits that you can buy. But check this out. We found this in our junk drawer. So just like we're going to do, you can make one. With a hammer and a small drift, just drive the pin back into its place. Yep. Now, with the dowel pin back at its happy home, All is once again right with the universe. Now we can do something about keeping him there, which is easily accomplished utilizing the bolt location right next to the dowel pin. Now, using our scrap piece, we've simply cut a tab and drilled a hole in it. We'll install the tab with a slightly longer bolt to compensate for the metal thickness and use Loctite to keep it where we put it.
All right, with our dowel pin secure, we're almost ready to start making some changes so we can increase the power output of our 5.9 diesel. Now, we picked up a couple of gauges from Bully Dog so we can monitor the boost and the exhaust gas temperatures from inside the cab. Now, before we finalize the turbo installation, we're going to go ahead and drill and tap the manifold for this EGT probe. Now, there's a couple of different spots you can choose from to drill and tap for an EGT probe. And we stuffed some paper towels into the manifold to minimize the amount of metal shavings that get left behind. After drilling an 1/8" pilot hole, we used a 5/16 bit to finish the job. And with the hole drilled, we used an 1/8" pipe tap to provide a mounting location for the EGT probe. Now, this job can be accomplished with the turbo and the manifold in the truck. It's just a little bit easier with it off. If you are doing it on the truck, pack the flutes of the tap with grease to help retain any metal shavings.
There is a piece of trivia that you guys probably wouldn't know, but...
Up next, Jack Roush stops by the shop for a little trivia. And later, we've got a heavy-duty replacement for our weak clutch. Stay tuned.
Hey, welcome back to the shop. Well, powerful diesel engines in light-duty trucks are commonplace nowadays, but it wasn't always like that. Jack Roush stopped by the shop recently, shared a little history with us.
There is a piece of trivia that you guys probably wouldn't know, but did you know who the person was that put the first Cummins diesel engine in a pickup truck?
No.
Me.
Really?
Really?
About 20 years ago, Chrysler came to me and said that, that they wanted to explore the prospect of putting a diesel 6-cylinder engine in a pickup truck.
Yeah.
And so what they had was an industrial engine. It wasn't a truck engine.
Heavy equipment engine.
Heavy equipment diesel engine, and it made so much noise that it was not feasible. It was not feasible. So we had to put a sound deadener in the firewall and add sound deadener in the oil pan and do some other things to make it package reasonable. But we did the first one.
Really?
For Chrysler.
That's cool.
That's neat. Well, there you go. From the man himself. It's pretty cool to be around a pioneer like that. Well, what we've had the chance to do is throw some new gaskets on, adjust the valves, clean a little bit of schmutz off the front of this engine. And since it's so easy to do with the body off the frame, well, we threw a new water pump on just because. With that done, now we can focus on turning up the wick.
Now, one of the easiest ways to add big power to one of these early Cummins is with some fairly small parts, like this Stage 4 torque plate we picked up from Bully Dog. Now, this part controls the maximum amount of fuel delivered to the engine at a certain RPM. Now, you combine this with a couple of other mechanical upgrades we're going to make, we'll easily be in the 300 horse and 700 pound-feet of torque range. Now, the kit also comes with a valve to alter the signal to the wastegate to increase boost pressure to match the increase in fuel. Now, the torque plate is located under the AFC housing. And based on the marks on the screw heads, well, it's pretty obvious to us somebody's been in here before making some adjustments. Now, before we install the new torque plate, we want to install a 3,000 RPM governor spring kit we picked up from ATS Diesel. And after getting a baseline measurement of the stick-out length of the governor spring stem, we removed the lock nut, the retainer, and the 2 inner springs, along with a couple of shims. Now, a magnet and a pick come in real handy when doing fine, tedious work like this. And if you've ever played the game Operation as a kid, well, you're already prepared. So to keep any buzzers from going off or keep you from inventing new words and chasing parts, make sure you don't drop anything into the injection pump housing. Now, the installation is pretty easy. It's the factory spring seat, the new ATS spring inside the factory spring, followed by the retainer and the lock nut. Just verify your measurements are the same. Now, we've got one more spring kit to install from ATS, but this time it's going in the AFC, or aneroid fuel control. And what this does is control how much fuel gets delivered to the engine in a low boost situation. Now, the governor spring kit we just installed is going to allow our engine to fuel to about 3,000 or 3,200 RPM, as opposed to the factory setting of about 2,200 RPM. Now, this AFC spring kit changes things a little bit differently. Now, by installing a lighter AFC spring, it's going to allow more fuel into the engine in a low boost situation, which is going to make more power and make the engine more responsive at lower RPM. All right, well, we're almost ready to install our modified AFC housing. But before we do that, we finally need to install our new torque plate. Now, the kit does come with an installation template, but since ours has already been tinkered with, we're going to install our fuel plate at almost the full forward position, which will allow for near maximum fuel rack travel. Now, we had picked up some 191 delivery valves from Industrial Injection to help boost the power output of this engine. But we're going to hold off on the installation until we get the truck up and running. Now, the delivery valve basically helps meter how much fuel gets injected into the cylinder. Now, if you're going to do this job, you need to remove the delivery valve holder to gain access, and that requires a special socket. And this isn't the only special tool we picked up to work on this diesel either.
That's right. And you've heard us say over and over again that having the right tool for the job can save you time, money, even parts, and that delivery valve socket is a perfect example of that. Now, in the Matco tool catalog, there are several diesel-specific tools, including this filter socket set, a clutch fan wrench, and this barring tool that's designed to sit in a port in the transmission adapter case and allows you to spin over that high compression engine with nothing more than a 3/8 ratchet. This thing comes in handy. They also offer diesel-specific filter wrenches, even this diesel compression testing kit, which is pretty much a necessity if you've got serious engine problems to diagnose. So it's nice to know that no matter what you're working on, Matco, well, they got the tool for you. Hey, welcome back to Trucks. Well, so far, all the engine projects on Super Dually have gone without any trouble. Well, now it's time to move some big chunks.
All right, now that we know we're going to be making more power, we need to make sure it actually gets to the ground. Now, with the increase in torque, well, it's obviously more than a stock-type clutch can handle, so we've got a heavy-duty replacement. Now, who knows what we're going to find when we take this transmission off, because obviously somebody's been in here before and incorrectly installed this bracket here. It's sandwiched in between the bell housing and the block adapter. But either way, we're going to take this transmission off, find out what's inside, and make an upgrade.
Okay, here's the clutch, pressure plate, and flywheel we pulled out of the big Dodge. Now, it's not hard to see that the clutch and pressure plate have been recently replaced. The problem is it's a stock replacement, and it's a cheap offshore replacement at that. Now, we're just not going to trust a stock clutch with our power upgrades. The other issue is this. Check out the flywheel. It hasn't been resurfaced. There's glazing and hot spots all over the place. So they got a brand new clutch on a flywheel that hasn't been resurfaced. Well, that's just goofy. Now, the first time I ever put a clutch in a vehicle, I was 16 or 17. It was a 63 Ford F100, 3-on-the-tree standard shift. And I did the same thing. I put a new clutch and didn't bother to have the flywheel resurfaced. And it was all glazed over. The thing chattered so hard when you let the clutch out that it wanted to shake you out of the vehicle. Well, my excuse is I was young and stupid back then. And we learned from our mistakes, hopefully. The other thing that we're going to do is pull this tail housing off and see if that problematic fifth gear nut issue has been addressed.
Now, we don't need any more proof than that right there, that a stock-type clutch assembly ain't gonna cut it behind our torquey straight 6. It's pretty obvious that the previous clutch that was installed got shredded to pieces. So to us at least, going back with the stocker was just a waste of time and money, especially considering we're gonna be making power improvements to the engine. So we might as well upgrade the clutch as well. That's why we're installing a South Bend clutch. Now, this Dynamax clutch kit we got from South Bend can handle up to 450 horsepower and 1,000 pound-feet of torque. And that should easily cover our power improvements as well as offer up some room for upgrades in the future. Now, this flywheel has been re-drilled to accommodate a slightly larger pressure plate, and that'll let us use a 13-inch clutch disc, which is an improvement over the stock 12-1/4-inch diameter. Now, the flywheel also uses a sealed roller bearing instead of the stock needle bearing setup, which is exposed to contamination. Now, this pressure plate is 5/8 of an inch larger than the stocker and improves clamping force as well. Now, the disc got some improvements too. They swapped out some of the torsional coil springs in favor of these neoprene dampers, which will stiffen up the disc, allowing it to handle more horsepower and torque. And the kit also includes a new throwout bearing and the necessary alignment tool. Now, in between the clutch diameter increase and the choice of clutch material linings, well, we're going to eliminate early clutch disc failure and still have nice smooth pedal engagement.
After installing the flywheel onto the end of the crankshaft using Loctite and 100 foot-pounds of torque, the alignment tool allows you to perfectly center the clutch disc. Then you're ready for the pressure plate, which is installed using Loctite and the bolts snug down in a star pattern. Now be careful not to run the bolts in with too much pressure because the final torque spec is only 20 foot-pounds and again is torqued down using a star pattern to ensure an even clamp load.
Hey, welcome back to the shop. Well, we've already made some power upgrades, dealt with some maintenance issues, and installed a heavy-duty clutch behind our diesel engine. We're almost ready to reinstall our manual transmission. But before we do that, we want to pull this rear tail housing off and see if the problematic fifth gear nut issue has been dealt with already. Now, I've already removed the PTO cover and drained the fluid, so we wouldn't make a mess on our bench top. Now this silver piece here is actually the fifth gear retaining nut. And what happens is the fifth gear on the main shaft actually rocks back and forth on the splines a little bit, allowing the nut to back off, letting this fifth gear assembly slide back. And once it slides back on the main shaft far enough to clear the fifth gear on the counter shaft, well, you're basically left with a 4-speed transmission, a repair to make, and a few options. And what we're gonna do to fix that is weld it. Now we're using a big clamp to provide a good ground on the retaining nut before welding, along with a glove to keep spatter off the gears. Now we're using the 4 notches on the retaining nut as a guide on where to place our tacks. That's to not throw the shaft out of balance. Now I know a lot of you guys are saying, well, you just ruined those threads. And you're probably right, it will be a pain in the neck to remove that fifth gear nut. But if we've got to go inside the case and deal with synchros or replace bearings, we're going to be replacing the factory main shaft anyway, because it's the root of the fifth gear problem. It doesn't allow for full fifth gear spline engagement. So an aftermarket unit will allow for full engagement and eliminate the fifth gear problem anyway. So this main shaft is sacrificial. And at least this way, well, we know we're not going to lose our overdrive.
Got one last bit of business. Tap in a new tail shaft seal, fill the transmission up with the recommended fluid. We're going to call this thing done. Now, if you got any questions about today's show, check us out online at PowerBlockTV.com. Thanks for watching Trucks. See you next time.
Today, we've got 7 of the very best custom hot rod builders in the nation helping us take Project Super Dually from a rough shell to a primed and ready to paint truck in just one show. It's all today here on Trucks.
Hey guys, welcome to Trucks. Well, there's a lot going on. We've got a room full of people and a room full of action because we're pretty serious about making some good progress on the paint and body side of things for Project Super Dually. And we're hoping to take it from how it sits now to ready for paint by the end of the show. So needless to say, we've got our work cut out for us. And if you're wondering who all these guys are that are cutting, grinding, welding, and making noise, well, they're not just day laborers that we picked up from the local temp agency.
Ryan's right. We've assembled a team of the baddest paint and body guys in the country. And although you may not recognize their faces, I know you've seen their work. We're calling this the Trucks TV Auto Body Thrash. So we're going to take a minute and introduce you to the team.
Welcome to the Trucks Auto Body Thrash. In the shop today, Alan Shepley.
Alan owns Mustang Central in Byron, Georgia, and specializes in custom resto mods, concourse restorations, and full-on race and performance Mustangs. He's even got 10 years experience in experimental engineering and prototyping.
Tim Strange.
Tim operates Strange Motion Rod and Customs out of Cambridge, Illinois. Their specialty is custom street rods and wicked street machines, racking up multiple awards, including America's Top Custom Award for his 52 Buick Copper.
Randy Borcherding.
Randy's shop is Paint House in Houston, Texas, where they crank out high-end customs, restorations, and flawless paint jobs. Randy's had several of his vehicles featured on POWERBLOCK and regularly competes at national and international car shows, consistently bringing home awards.
Eric Saliba.
We've shown you Eric's Little Shop of Horrors down in Lawrenceburg, Tennessee before, where they crank out custom projects with a focus on blending new technology and nostalgic looks. In just a few short years, Eric's built impressive vehicles that have been featured both on TV and in print.
Jeff Greening.
Jeff is half of the father and son team that owns Greening Auto Company. And with over 40 years experience and a true passion for the automotive industry, Jeff is responsible for the stunning paint and bodywork that has won them worldwide notoriety and a long list of very happy clients.
Jesse Greening.
Jesse's the other half, and his amazing talent has led them to place as one of the great 8 finalists for the highly coveted Riddler Award. They've also been a Street Rod of the Year finalist, as well as an 08 SEMA Best GM Vehicle Award winners.
Brian Finch.
Brian's the proprietor of Finch Hot Rod Transformations out of Hermitage, Tennessee. His specialty is 60s and 70s era muscle cars, and he builds them bumper to bumper, including the paintwork. He's on his way to becoming a top builder in the custom pro touring ranks.
Okay, now that you met the guys, here's the plan. Basically, we got the truck divvied up into about 3 sections. The bed being the most challenging since we're having to make our own dually fenders. Then there's the cab with the doors placed on stands in different places around the room. And then finally, the front nose section, or what we refer to it as the dog house. Now, we're doing a couple of different things, but you better pay attention because these guys are good and they're fast. Now, we're calling this a thrash, but don't think for a second that it's unorganized. These guys know exactly what to do, and each team member fell into a job and got busy. Now, everybody has a different specialty. Street rods, mini trucks, muscle cars, but the common thread to all of this is good old-fashioned hard work. And we're gonna have to cut through some crusty crap metal to make room for some brand new good metal.
Okay, we're running a tape line here to make sure we cut this panel off straight. We're making sure we're just cutting the outer panel. As soon as I get this cut out, we're gonna grind it. Randy's gonna cut a panel and put it right here on this edge here.
Now, a lot of guys, including myself, prefer to use a MIG welder for sheet metal. But it takes a lot of finesse to TIG weld single-walled sheet metal because of the incredibly focused heat zone.
Just trying to even up the gap so we can keep bringing the metal together to where it's easier just to TIG together. And the reason we're TIGging it together is it'll help us not have to grind so much with it.
Now, some of these sheet metal panels are brand new, but other places we had no choice but to work with what was already there. And Randy Borchening takes a crack at stating the obvious.
Well, I've discovered some rust. It's kind of hard to tell, I'm sure, but these are rusty areas. There's some really tiny ones back here, but they imply that the metal's really thin all the way along here. So I'm gonna cut out this whole area. We'll make a patch, weld it back in. Yeah, I think we can bring it back from the dead. We're gonna resurrect this one.
Now, some of the cool stuff we get to show you are the homemade tools and techniques from all of these guys. Like this tip from Eric. You're pulling a crown into an otherwise flat panel to match the contour of the factory stamped door. It works perfectly. Now, they make patch panels for a lot of this truck, but not this door. This is one of the rare, shorter doors for the quad cab truck. So what Eric has done is used some 20-gauge flat stock and a brake, made his own patch panel and rolled it under. That's what 10 or 15 years of hacking up mini trucks will do for you. Nice job. Now, the front of the door skin was good here, but the backside in the jamb was ate up with rust. Nobody makes a patch panel for this. So, Brian, tell them what you're doing.
So as Kevin said, we want to maintain the integrity of this front panel, keep it, we don't have to do a lot of work. We cut out where all the rot was, make a new patch filler piece in here. We separate the panels, clean out all the rust, treat it with some good metal prep. Come back in with a small strip of metal on the backside. We'll weld it along the end, grind it, good as new.
Now, it seems like a lot of work for just a small patch, but these guys know you do it once and you do it right.
Exactly.
Up next, more of the truck's auto body thrash. Stay tuned.
Hey guys, welcome back to the shop. As you can hear, we're running wide open, and our all-star crew is making some awesome progress on our Project Super Dually paint and body thrash session. Now, they've already got one customized dually fender already welded in and looking really, really good. Now all they got to do is replicate it on the other side. The problem is, it looks like this. It's beat up, banged up, rusty, just plain nasty, and more than a few hours away from looking like the other side. But I've got faith. And I know just enough about bodywork to stay the heck out of the way when these guys are in the room. But one thing that's going to hold these guys up before they get to the other side and do the other fender flare is replacing some of the 40-year-old rotted and well-used bed floor sections. While LMC does offer complete bed floor replacements, we opted just for a few sections and just welded it to the solid middle section. Since this is going to be a work truck, well, it's going to get covered up with bedliner anyway.
And no, this is not Ian Johnson's hairdryer. It's a really cool tool we picked up from Matco that recycles the blast media and captures it so it doesn't shoot out into the rest of the room. It does a great job. Now, it's a great turning point in any project when we graduated from the hardcore metal work to using a little bit of filler to fine-tune the panels. Obviously, Eric's got the perfect ratio of hardener. But now, any major paint and body project is a process of constant refinement, especially when you're used to the level of fit and finish that these professionals are. You can tell a pro by their attention to detail. Check the panel gap. It's OE standard, it's nice and even all the way to the top, but you follow it down to where Alan made his patch, and it gets a little wider. Alan, walk me through what you're gonna do.
Well, Kevin, this has been anything but typical. We have 9 guys attacking this thing at one time. Normally, when you'd build this patch, you would have the door on the truck.
Yeah.
But due to the problem of people being on this vehicle at the same time, I had to do the door off the truck. So now I just snuck over here while nobody was looking and stuck the door on here, and I see we have a gap problem. So what I'm going to do is come in and weld this up and close in the gap and smooth it off, and it'll be good as new.
With the ultra-thin layer of Bondo blocked out and blended into the rest of the door perfectly, these guys were ready to move on to the next step. And that meant dragging a lot of the exterior panels and the doors into the paint booth for a heavy coat of black polyester primer. Now, Brian Finch is spraying the Clausen primer, but Brian Smith of Auto Body Color and Supply hooked us up big time with all of our paint and body materials. Jesse and Tim started over with brand new sheet metal for the passenger side of the bed, but they still had to figure out how to make room for the matching dually fender.
What we're doing is figuring out the location of this fender, where it is, and put it over on the other side. We run a straight edge along these body lines, which are factory, measured from flat over, locating point, same here, locating. Run a straight edge across this body line, down through the center line of these trim clips, which are the same locations from the factory on the other side. Measure down and give us points, and then we go and transfer them over to the other side.
And although Tim Strange is pretty handy with the welder, Elvis called and he wants his belt back. Now, with the first round of primer dry and ready to block, Brian and Alan attacked it with 100 grit, which is very aggressive sandpaper. But most of the primer is going to end up on the floor since this is the last stage of your filler work.
And here's why I had faith in Tim and Jesse. With the precision TIG work they did, it took very little body filler to make our new dually fender seamless.
The auto body thrash was a week-long exercise in an unbelievable amount of activity. And there was no pretense with any of these guys. Everybody had fun, got along great, and when one job got finished, well, everybody just tag-teamed up on the next one until piece by piece, section by section, and project by project, Super Dually really was starting to take shape. And even though it may look like a TV studio smashed into a body shop, real progress was definitely being made.
Done.
Up next, Super Dualies coming together. Stick around.
Welcome back to Trucks. Well, with hours and hours of filler work done, we're finally ready to throw some primer onto the cab. Now, with a half-acre of sheet metal on the roof panel and 30 years of life as a work truck, well, guess what? You're going to have a little bit of filler buildup. But it's okay, because it's very thin, and it's going to level out the surface to where it'll take primer and be able to be blocked out quite easily. The surfacer that we're using, again, is Clausen All You Need high-build polyester primer surfacer, and it is literally spray bondo. It's the next stage in the bodywork process and the final stage of the filler. Now, since we had so many different highly qualified people, we kind of traded off on some duties. This is the second coat of primer after blocking on the doors and the first coat on the hood. Eric wanted a shot at shooting the poly through the giant 2.5 orifice on the Inesta spray gun, so he went to work laying down a fat coat of poly primer. Now, after these panels have been blocked once and reprimed again, you can really see the fact that these cats know what they're doing. The reflection of the wet primer shows that these panels are laser straight and really are ready for paint. Now, the bed assembly was probably the most ambitious section of the bodywork. With both bedsides being beat up and rusty and not having any dually fenders, well, it was a very aggressive project. Tim and Jesse did an awesome job grafting in the LMC steel fenders into the bed in true street rod style, and it shows up in Randy's primer.
Since this project took place over several days, we had plenty of time to allow the primer to dry completely. And once it was, we strapped it up to our crane using several heavy-duty ratchet straps. With the help of 5 or 6 guys, we carefully lowered it down onto the frame.
Check it out. This is the first time we see Super Dually with all the body work done. We get to see it as a truck again. These guys work fast, so pay attention.
We're going to split up into teams, have people start hanging the doors. We're going to get the doghouse assembled on the front, hang the fenders on it, set the hood, and then last thing is we'll grab the bed, set the bed on, good as new.
Now, we were focused mainly on the exterior body panel, and we'll get the inner fenders, the under hood, and the inside of the cab painted completely once we're a little further down the road. Now, the reassembly, along with the rest of the project, was a complete and total team effort, with everybody gelling and working side by side like they've known each other for years. And we'd have these guys back in the truck shop any day of the week.
Now, this is just one of the many, many times we're going to have this thing disassembled and reassembled, so the gaps aren't perfect, but it's there. It's cool.
Hey guys, welcome back to the shop. Check it out. The primer's barely dry, the body's reassembled and sitting back on the chassis, and all the hard work that our all-star crew put in has paid off big time. This thing looks flat out mean.
With over 200 years of collective experience, the team managed to stuff in over 400 hours of labor in just under 5 days. We're not kidding. And check out, we got cool custom dually fenders, the panel gaps are right, the panels are straight, all the rust is gone, and this thing's in final primer, ready to sand, shoot some color on. And we know this thing's well on its way to becoming the cool project that we've planned out on paper. But don't forget, you can get any one of these guys to help you with your project as well. Just follow the web link on the Trucks and POWERBLOCK websites and look them up. Just don't hire them all at once. Now, on behalf of everybody here at Trucks TV, we wanted to send you home with some stuff. So we got you a cool Trucks t-shirt in your size, a license tag, some neat stickers, and some licorice, which needs no explanation whatsoever. And on behalf of our friends at Inesta Spray Equipment, we're sending each one of you home with one of their brand new Supernova spray guns, which is designed by Pina Farina. Nice piece of gear. Now, in all seriousness, guys, thank you so much for your hard work and time. If you got any questions over what you've seen on today's show, or you want to get in touch with these guys, go to the POWERBLOCK website, truckstv.com. Check it out. Thanks for watching Trucks. See y'all next time. Whose licorice is this? You.
Today, we're spraying sound insulation inside the cab of Project Super Dually, and we're adding a DIY bedliner. And we've got some painting tips to help you get a perfect paint job. Finally, we'll give Super Dually some chrome. It's all today here on Trucks.
It looks pretty tough.
Hey, welcome to Trucks. Well, Project Super Dually is going to be a one-of-a-kind vehicle. Now, we were going to submit a request for a brand new diesel dually tow rig that we could use as a parts chaser and to pull our rigs around to off-road events and things like that. But then we started thinking about it, and you know what? We don't buy trucks, we build trucks, so that's exactly what we set about to do. But instead of getting a used rig, a used dually, and fixing it up, we decided to go a different direction and get two completely different vehicles and mash them together. And this is what we ended up with. Super Dually is a 79 Ford body sitting on top of a 97 Dodge Dually chassis. And we had 7 of the baddest metal masters in the land come and help us straighten out the wrinkles in the bodywork. And in less than a week, these guys brought this truck back to life.
Man, those guys did a great job on the exterior of the truck getting it ready for paint. But there just wasn't any time left over to pay any attention to the interior. So that's what we're going to do today. Now, this is a 70s era pickup truck, and back then, well, they just didn't focus that much on sound deadening and insulation. And you combine that with the fact that we're running a 12-valve Cummins diesel, and they're not exactly known for their whisper quiet operation, and you can easily see how it would get kind of loud and boomy here in the cab. So we're going to address that and try to keep the diesel clatter and road noise on the outside of the truck. Keep it comfortable and quiet here on the inside.
Now, inside the bed, other than a few places where we've patched to replace some rotten metal, well, it's almost exactly like we found it. But remember, this is a work truck, not a show truck, so it's a little rough, but that's okay. We're going to prep the surface, not worry too much about a few little dents or pop knots here and there, and throw a fat coat of bedliner in this thing.
Now, inside the cab, we're going to use a product that the guys over in Horsepower have had really good luck with in the past, and it's lizard skin spray-on sound insulation. Now, we've had success with the adhesive sound deadening mats before as well, but there are some advantages to the spray-on insulation. Now, they've got a couple of different formulas, first being their SC, or sound control formula, and this stuff is really going to reduce the noise and vibration inside the cab. It's also going to protect all the surfaces from continued moisture and corrosion, any rust issues that we'd see. And this stuff's good to about 300 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, the other option is their CI, or ceramic insulation formula, and it's good for higher heat applications as it can withstand temperatures of about 500 degrees. It'll also reduce engine and heat transfer by about 25 degrees. And since it's water-based, well, it's easy to clean up, it's environmentally friendly, and you don't need a respirator to apply it. Now, another advantage to both of these coatings is they go on really, really thin, just 40 mils or 1 millimeter thick. And that'll prevent you from altering the fitment of your interior panels, saving you extra work and a big fat headache. Now, you can use both of these products on the same panels, but if you do, make sure you apply the sound control formula first. Now, to spray it on, you're going to need a gun with a rather large orifice or opening. Now, since we're going to be focusing on the interior today, we're going to go with this one. Now, this stuff's a pretty thick consistency, so use an electric drill with the paddle mixer and go ahead and mix it for a good little while. It helps you count to 100. You want to make sure it's thoroughly mixed. Now, once you're happy that everything is evenly mixed and you've saved as much of the product as you can, go ahead and dunk the mixing paddle in water. That is, if you want to reuse it. Once the lizard skin sets up, it's going to be very difficult to remove. At least I'm not making a mess. Now this stuff sprays really easily, especially if you use the spray gun that they offer. But if you're using a spray gun that you already own, just remember to change out to a larger diameter tip before you start. Now it's always a good technique to use an overlapping pattern, whether you're spraying paint or laying down an insulation type product like this.
Off the bed floor with a wire brush and all the dust blown out, so we're ready to rock and roll. Now, we've shown you prepping rusty metal with a chemical to set it up to be able to put a bed liner on it in the past, but there's different ways to go about this. We're going to do it different this time with POWER15. It stands for paint over rust, and basically it bonds with the rust and creates a solid coating that you can then put your bed liner over top of. Now, just like the bed liner we're going to put on top of it, POWER15 is a moisture-cured urethane, meaning it doesn't need a catalyst to cure. It uses moisture in the atmosphere. Now, I'm not using POR on the good metal. That'll take a different primer.
Up next, we'll roll on our DIY bed liner, and later, painting secrets revealed. Stay tuned.
And you can see the perfect impression of my hand on the steel.
Hey guys, welcome back to the shop. Well, our lizard skin spray-on sound insulation is dry to the touch for the most part. But like most spray-on coatings, it does need a full 24 hours to completely cure. So we can't crawl up in here and get any work done. But the good news is, there's plenty of work to be done in the bed.
That's right, there is plenty of work to do on both of these projects, but they're both easy to do, making them great DIY projects that you guys can do at home. Now, I've gotten a little bit of a head start here by throwing some seam sealer in some of the gaps and coating the bare steel with some Duplicolor primer, since the bed liner system we're putting in here likes to sit on a coating rather than bare steel. Now, this is something fairly recent from Duplicolor. They're calling it their Bed Armor DIY Bed Liner Kit, and it's a little bit different than what they've had before in that it's a moisture-cured urethane, which means that it uses good old-fashioned H2O, or moisture in the atmosphere, to lock it together and make it a very strong coating. Now, one thing I like about Duplicolor is that they know how to assemble a kit, and they've included everything you need here, including a tray, an applicator that's going to create the right texture and look great, a stir stick, a prep pad for surface prep, even a touch-up brush to get in those hard-to-reach recesses and areas that you can't reach with a roller. Oh, yeah. Providing your bed surface, paint, and everything is clean like ours is, a red scuffing pad is all you need to create the tooth or texture that the bed liner needs to sit on. Now, DIY obviously means do it yourself, so get ready to burn some calories, because the sacrifice for not paying somebody to do it is a little bit of hard work. That's it. Now, with paint prep, there's no such thing as too clean. And the thin layer of dust that I'm blowing off, well, it would interfere with the adhesion of the bed liner. So you better make sure your substrate is clean. We're going to follow that with a final wipe down of Duplicolor's paint prep in an aerosol can. This makes sure that all the wax and grease and contaminants are off of the panels and will further aid in the adhesion of our new bed liner. Now, the piece of masking paper that I'm using to sit on, just make sure I don't drag anything else into what I'm trying to coat over top of. It just keeps things cleaner. Now, there's no real technique in putting the first coat on, but the roller gives you the opportunity to smooth out any runs or clumps that are in the coating. Now, another benefit to using the piece of paper is that I can paint myself out of the corner and not get trapped. Now, the first coat doesn't look like much, but that's okay. It's not supposed to. It's got a single purpose, and that is to hang on to the second coat of bedliner. The second coat is what has the mill thickness and the strength and the texture and look of a bedliner. Now, the second coat is where the magic happens and where you get the look of a professionally applied bed coating. Now, 2 coats will give you a strong coating, but if you have to apply 3, well, that's not a problem either. This is recoatable and repairable, unlike a vulcanized coating. Now, you may notice that we're putting the coating over top of dents, but that's okay because this is going to be a work truck and we're going to use it for one. It would probably take 30 or 40 hours of bodywork technique to get the inside of this bed smooth, and quite frankly, it's just not worth it when it's going to get beat up all over again. Now, from the time your bed is prepped, it's probably going to take you an hour, maybe an hour and a half to apply it, but it's time well spent because it's a good-looking coating and hides a lot of sins. There you go. The second coat sure gives it the texture and the strength that you want. Another good thing is that, like we said before, it's water-based. So if you mess up, like I did right here, kind of went over my masking tape, it's a simple water cleanup. Done.
Up next, it's proactive painting tips. And later, we'll try on the biggest piece of jewelry in the shop. Stick around.
Hey guys, welcome back to Trucks. Well, we're getting closer and closer to being able to put paint on Super Dually. Now that we've got the lizard skin on the inside of the interior and the bed liner inside the bed, we can finally focus on the exterior panels. Speaking of, we wanted to show you the paint scheme that we picked out for the truck. This is Summit Racing's new line of base coat, clear coat paint systems. This is their bomber blue and gunmetal metallic. We think the color combination looks great. The clear has a nice gloss holdout. It's going to look fantastic on that truck. Now, speaking of a paint job, you always want to strive for the perfect paint job. Well, the secret to a perfect paint job is actually not a secret at all. It's technique. And it's not just one technique. It's a bunch of different procedures thrown together, and it's being conscientious every step of the way. So what I wanted to do is show you some things that are going to really help you achieve that perfect paint job. Now, you're always going to see me painting with some kind of a monkey suit or a paint suit on, gloves, and a good breathing apparatus. And as important as that is to safety, it's also important for controlling contamination. Contamination is your enemy in a paint job. Stuff falling into the paint, coming off your skin or off your clothes. And it's very important, especially to wear gloves. And here's why. Now, this is a piece of bare 20-gauge steel that I laid my hand on and kind of held it there a couple of weeks ago for about, 15, 20 seconds. And you can see the perfect impression of my hand on the steel. That's because the acid and oil that's secreted from my skin deposited onto the steel and reacted. This will get trapped on your surface, between your primer layers, between your paint layers, especially on bare steel. So it's a great idea to wear gloves. Now, these blue gloves are nitrile. We get them from Kimberly-Clark, and they're really good protection against depositing contamination into your work. These latex gloves don't hold up as well under solvent, but they're better than nothing. Now, contamination can come from your equipment as well, so it's kind of a no-brainer to keep your paint guns clean. But here's something you don't want to do. You don't want to get solvent inside the air inlet. The reason is that the inside of these passages aren't coated like the outside, and they'll actually rust or corrode from the inside with the moisture that's in solvent. So here's a good idea. It's just a simple, cheap vacuum cap. Plug the end while you're cleaning your paint gun. Keep the moisture and the solvent out of the inside air passages of the gun while you clean it. Now, after your spray gun's clean, use a dedicated spray gun lubricant. These won't react with paint. Just a drop in all the metal on metal areas. That's all you need. That way your gun's ready for you the next time you pick it up. And resist the urge to use metal objects to clean the inside passages of the paint gun, like a paper clip or these welding files. These can damage the highly machined internal surfaces and ruin a paint gun. Only use products and equipment that's dedicated and specifically made to clean out a paint gun. These won't break down under solvent either. Now, another area you can get contamination or dirt in your paint job is from the air hose itself. So whenever I do a paint job, I'll prep the hose with some wax and grease remover and give it a wipe down the first 3 or 4 feet of the hose. That way you know you're not transferring dirt or contamination onto the panel, which is actually really close to the paint gun. Now here's something old school. Now think of your car in the paint booth as a big giant magnet and all the dust particles floating around in the air as pieces of steel that are going to get sucked down into your magnet and into your wet paint. Well, here's an old school trick that's very easy to do. Grind off the paint, or the rust in this case, off of a frame chunk and simply bolt a chain up to the frame. Make sure it hangs down onto the floor on a clean spot too. And what this is going to do is discharge the magnet and really help to eliminate the static cling that's going to draw that stuff and all that other contamination that you don't want to buff out of your paint job into those panels. Now, each one of these tips by themselves, well, they'll help, but stringing a lot of different really proactive and good tips together creates a mindset to where you're going to have a clean atmosphere and you're going to be careful doing your procedures. Because remember, the perfect paint job, well, it's all in the details, and every little bit helps.
Hey guys, welcome back to the shop. Well, Project Super Dually's getting closer to being ready for that blue and gray paint scheme that Kevin showed you earlier. But once we get it done, we're not going to throw the beat up and dented factory grille back in this thing. We're going to upgrade to something a little bit cleaner and a little bit meaner. Now this is a factory replacement grille shell with a billet aluminum insert. It looks pretty tough. Now, I've measured the factory Dodge radiator, condenser, and intercooler setup, and they require about 7.5 or 8 inches worth of room. Now, if I measure from behind the grill to the face of the fan clutch, well, it looks like we've got a little over 9 inches of space to deal with. Now, we'll obviously have to remove the center post from the factory radiator core support, but we'll reinforce it with something else. Now, it's going to be a tight fit, and if we need a little bit of extra room, well, we'll just remove the mechanical fan and replace it with 2 slimmer electric fans. Either way, I think we're in good shape.
Today, Project Super Dually gets a new paint job. We've got some of our auto body thrash friends back in the booth to help get this behemoth looking even better than it did when it was brand new. It's all today here on Trucks.
Hey guys, welcome to Trucks. Well, Project Super Dually, our 79 Ford body sitting on a 97 Dodge chassis, is taking up just about every square foot of our brand new prep station. And it's just about ready to spray some color on. But this project didn't start out looking this clean. If you remember, it was quite the thrash to get this once rusted out hulk of sheet metal looking like it does now. This old Ford had been sitting in the weeds for at least the last 15 years. While it was all there, well, it was definitely rough. And that required lots of patch panels to replace the rust with solid sheet metal. But we had plenty of qualified help in the shop, and these guys knocked it out in a big way. They helped us achieve our goal of having the truck buried in a fat coat of high-build primer and ready for paint.
Now, I know you guys remember Randy Borcherding from Paint House from the Auto Body Thrash Show. Well, he was kind enough to fly all the way out here from Houston, Texas to give us a hand prepping this thing. And quite frankly, it's nice to have the help because this thing is the size of a small house. Now, obviously, some work has happened since the last time you saw Super Dually. It was in black primer when we finished it up with the thrash, and now it's in gray primer. What I did was block it with 100 grit, followed by 180 to level out the surfacer one final time. Then we sprayed some of Summit Racing's 2K gray urethane primer surfacer to get it ready for a cool bed of paint. But I use a different system and a different set of sanding blocks than what I usually use to prep for paint. This is what we reached for. These are soft sanders from the Styline Corporation that we picked up at our local Matco tool distributor. And yes, they're soft and flexible, but interestingly enough, they've got different shapes molded into the sanders to be able to contour and to block effectively the different shapes and coves on all these different vehicles, which is perfect for our dually because there's all the different shapes and the coves and the hard lines. Now, we also use the Styline sandpaper, and although these are flexible and will contour, the benefit is using both of these in a system. Now, here's how the soft sanders work. Normally, what you do is take your sandpaper and apply it to the block, stick it down, and you've got a sanding board. But when you go to contour, you see these folds? What those folds do is they raise edges, and of course this is exaggerated, but those edges, well, they're gonna dig into your primer or your paint. Not good. Here's the magic of the soft sanders. You take their paper, you lay it down on the contour first. You take the soft sander, contour it to the panel, and you've got a convex or concave surface that matches the panel that you're blocking with no crinkles, no wrinkles, and nothing that's going to dig into your paint. And what this does is give you a very effective tool that's custom made to exactly mirror image the panel that you're blocking. It saves time, and it's going to have a better outcome. We'll see how it works on the whole truck. Now, Randy's no stranger to pushing a sanding block, and we both agree that blocking out a vehicle is one of the main components in getting a nice paint job. We're wet blocking with 320 grit Superflex paper. Now, coming down the road at you, this truck is going to look like a big square box, but trust me, there's not a flat panel on it, far from it. But you can see how these soft sanders fit into the contours, and they'll literally keep you from digging ruts into the paint that'll show through in your top coats. This little guy fits in this curve right here. The bottom line is all about the tools and having the right tool for the job. These will get it done. Using a guide coat, well, it's obvious what it does. It shows you where the low spots and high spots are. And having lightweight sanding boards that are a bunch of different shapes is a huge benefit, especially on this truck or any custom project that's not just flat panels. But wet blocking with sticky back paper, it just hasn't been possible until I found this stuff. Now, with conventional sandpaper, the grit lets go when it gets wet, and the adhesive doesn't work at all. It destroys the sandpaper. But Styline sandpaper, obviously we're using it wet, and the adhesive stays active. That's pretty cool. And when you're pushing a sanding block against a panel, it really helps to have that panel still attached to the vehicle. It just gives you something to work against. And even though we spent our time wet blocking the sides, we decided to hit the roof with some DA sanders just to knock it down, because the truth is, the only people that are going to see that roof are the weather helicopters. And with the cab and doghouse blocked out and ready for paint, well, we got to blow it apart again, because remember, this is a complete color change, and we have to paint the insides. And before they can be painted, well, they've got to be prepped like everything else. And now we have more sanding. Now, one of my favorite sayings is, the harder it is to sand, the more important it is to sand it, so the backsides and all the cracks and crevices get prepped as well. And these red Norton scuffing pads do a great job of conforming to all the tight contours. And it's a coarse enough grit to where they'll give the sealer plenty of tooth to grab onto. Now, with the help of Randy, our soft sanders, and Styline Superflex sandpaper, we're making great progress on Super Dually. So, let's talk about paint. We've shown you our spray out panel with the two colors that we've chosen for Super Dually's two-tone using Summit Racing's brand new two-stage base coat clear coat paint system. Now, this is a professional grade system at a budget price. They've got different clear coats, different speeds of hardeners, different reducer selections, base coats, epoxy primers, primer surfacers, and even the chemicals that you need to clean it up. So it's a complete system, but more importantly, you get these downloadable P-sheets that are available on Summit's websites for free. They go over everything: mix ratios, application guides, dry times, all the information that you really need to use these chemicals properly. So it's not just about the chemicals, it's about knowing the rules, and that just makes it a lot easier.
Up next, we're finally spraying paint, and Randy's creating an awesome Ghost logo, and later painting the cab and reassembling Super Dually. Stay tuned.
Hey guys, welcome back to Trucks. Well, it's safe to say that Super Dually is a big truck, so a paint job is a monumental undertaking, but doesn't mean you can skimp on the details, like this pinhole that's right in the line of sight at the top of the bedside. And no matter how much time it takes, you have to commit to taking care of the details at this stage, and that's what makes the difference between a splash job and a really good paint job.
And it's fixed. The paint job itself, the time in the booth, pulling the trigger on a gun is probably not even measurable in percentages. If you're really smoothing out a vehicle, especially a large one like this, we've got a lot of time in the panels, multiple primings and blockings, and it takes so many hours, hundreds, even thousands in the case of show cars, before you might paint for 3 or 4 hours.
And with everybody signing off on our progress, we're ready to move on to the next step, which is a sealer coat. We're using the Summit brand epoxy sealer. Now, epoxy is literally a spray glue. It sticks to everything, and everything sticks to it. So with a proper mix ratio, not only does it guarantee that our ground coats, our paint coats are going to stick to the surface, but also that we have a uniform color in which to spray our paint on, which is really the primary function of a sealer coat in the first place. Now, it takes about 30 minutes before you can spray the base coat onto the sealer, which is just about the amount of time it's going to take you to clean your equipment out and mix up your base colors. We're starting with the Gunmetal Metallic out of the Summit Racing color palette. Now, once you've downloaded your P-sheets, they're going to tell you to catalyze the base coat. This does a couple of things. It makes the base lay out a little bit smoother, and it gives it a chance to chemically cross-link with the ground coat and for the clear coat to lock into it, which is pretty important and makes it all one continuous coat instead of a bunch of layers stacked up. Now, there's a specific technique that we're using that we all agreed on for this paint job since it's completely disassembled, and that is following the same recipe for every part, regardless of where it is or when you shoot it. And it starts with using the gunmetal gray on every bit of the panel, even though it's going to be two-toned. What this does, it sets up a repeatable pattern that we can transpose onto the rest of the panels, and that will guarantee a color match combined with the right technique. Now, we didn't want to let Randy's custom painting talent go to waste while we had him locked in here. So we set him to the task of creating a cool ghost effect with the Super Dually logo in the top of the bedside. And he came up with something really simple, but very cool.
A candy with some pearl added in it, sprayed over our blue, gives it a ghosty effect where under some conditions you won't see it, and under other conditions it will just jump out and be obvious. It's got two effects, one where it disappears and one where it appears.
Now, with Randy burying his graphic in clear, another member of the Autobody Thrash team showed up to give us a hand. Brian Finch came ready to get to work and wasn't shy about sharing his point of view. Now, Brian's got a bit of an opinion here. This is the inside of the door that I messed up. That's the one that he messed up. So what's your point?
You get what you pay for.
We're not paying you. Now, with all hands on deck, we set up a real production environment so we could get this job done. Now, if you use a recipe or preset guidelines, you can get away with using different painters and get the same results, which is pretty important in this case because we're trying out a brand new paint system. Now, Summit calls this a budget paint system, but you'd never know by spraying it. And it was cool to get some feedback from these guys.
The paint covers really well the first time. It lays down nice. It's very forgiving, you know, for somebody who may not be an expert in gun setup or proper technique. The paint just goes on and does what it's supposed to, especially the clear coat. The clear coat, you know, laid down nice. It had a good flow out, but you could hammer it down and it wouldn't run, right? So, you know, very, very impressed for what it is. I'd use it.
Now, painting Super Dually the way we're doing saves you a lot of time on masking and certain preparation. But the price you pay, well, it's multiple painting sessions and having a place to store the parts. Even with all of that, it's still easier than trying to wedge that entire truck into the booth.
We just physically couldn't fit that truck in the booth at the same time. Plus, if I had to shoot that truck all at one time, my arm would get tired and I'd just go home.
Up next, putting Humpty Dooley back together again. Stick around.
Hey, swing open. Hey, welcome back to Trucks. Well, we're knee-deep in the paint job for Project Super Dually. Some parts are shot, some parts are primed, some parts are masked, but there's still a ton of work to do for all three of us. Now, obviously, any paint job constitutes a whole lot of work and a substantial learning curve. Now, if you're trying to weigh the difference between farming this out and paying somebody to do it or doing it yourself, think about it like this. We got 3 guys working, it's about 60 hours worth of work, and that doesn't even consider the body work that was done prior to what you're seeing now. That's just the spraying of the paint. That doesn't consider also disassembly and reassembly after the wet work is done. So again, just for the paint job, you're gonna have about $4,000 labor at any body shop across America, plus about $1,500 charges in materials. So if you wanna weigh that against a little bit of a learning curve and figuring out how to do this yourself, well, you've got options. Because you can either save up some money and pay somebody to do your paint job, or invest a little bit of money and a lot more time, do it yourself, or just look for a project that's already got a clean paint job on it. Now, with all the high-tech prep stations and paint booths and HVLP this and modern efficient that, the process of painting itself hasn't changed much since they moved away from brushes to spraying paint in the first place, and that was back in the 20s. Now, a spray gun is essentially identical to a carburetor, where a liquid is mixed with air, breaking it up into small particles or atomizing it so it can be applied smoothly and evenly onto a surface. Now, over the years, spray gun technology has become very sophisticated. Even so, when you're like Randy and you've been spraying paint for more than 20 years, sometimes tried and tested, reliable technology is kind of what you stick with. Such is the case with his AccuSpray siphon feed gun.
I call it Old Faithful. It sprays everything perfectly the first time. I don't have to go back and fix striping problems or uneven metallics. It works every time, and I don't see a reason to change that. Yeah, it's a little harder to clean, it's a little more awkward at times, but the finished product more than makes up for that.
And if you've seen some of the award-winning, flawless work that Randy kicks out over and over again, well, it's kind of hard to argue with that kind of success. How's it look?
Good so far. Get up here.
Now, with the overspray cleared out, the paint dry, and everything laid down smooth as glass, it's time to get to the fun part, reassembly.
Yep, we're on.
Now, this is the last time that we're ever going to put the doors back on the cab. So, of course, we're spending a little bit of time making sure we don't bruise the paint, but also that we get nice panel gaps and a good alignment.
Pivot out.
Now, the doghouse, well, that's a different story, because not only have the aprons and the back of the firewall not been painted, we've still got to do things like figure out our steering linkage, which steering column we're going to use, what kind of brake booster we're going to use. So this is purely a mock-up, but I got to tell you, after all the hard work and all the time that it's taken to get here, we can't wait to get this thing assembled.
Hey guys, welcome back to the shop. Now, the last time we showed you this shot, we were revealing recent bodywork and fresh primer. But check this out. Kevin, Randy, and Brian put in another long week's worth of work to give Project Super Dually this super slick blue and gray two-tone, then buried it in clear.
And we can't thank those guys enough for kicking in and working their butts off. Heck, Randy even laid in the Super Dually logo on the upper bedside for a nice, cool custom touch. Now, we tried 2 different things here. The first one was a new unconventional sanding block system that really saved us a lot of time in prepping Super Dually. The second was a so-called budget line of paint from Summit Racing. And the base colors, well, they laid out great. The colors are even and consistent, and even though this truck was painted by 3 different shooters, completely disassembled, well, everything matches when you put it all back together. And the clear coat, well, it speaks for itself. The gloss and depth is beautiful. So in my mind, 2 A+ for both of those systems. And what that does is get Super Dually ready for a whole new set of projects. Hey, welcome to Trucks. We're making great progress on Project Super Dually, getting the doors built up, glass installed, but as you can see, Well, there's no driver control, so essentially this thing's a glorified TV prop until we figure out a way to get this classic body to communicate with the new modern chassis.
And a big part of that is the cooling systems for the engine, turbocharger, and passengers in the form of the radiator, intercooler, and AC condenser. Now, we definitely want to try to reuse all these stock pieces. It'll save us big bucks and we can avoid going to the aftermarket for some custom units. Now, if possible, we'd really like to use the stock Dodge core support. It's got the mounting locations built in, along with the correct spacing between the intercooler, condenser, and the radiator. Plus, it'd be nice to drop in one modular unit like that. Now, the radiator, well, it was damaged in the wreck. The mounting pegs are broken, it's leaking, and, well, it's just kind of in rough shape. But it's perfect for mock-up, because we don't have to worry about damaging it. Now all we have to do is try to make this stuff work. After a careful disassembly of our freshly painted truck, we could move on with what we refer to as Plan A. Now, we were trying to keep as much of the Ford factory sheet metal as possible and trying to make the Dodge components work.
Yeah. Okay, the good news is we have clearance between the fan clutch and the radiator core. The bad news, obviously, the radiator is just too wide. So we're at a crossroads. We can do A, design a complete custom cooling system for this truck and spend a lot of money that we don't need to, or B, recycle the Dodge system, which is designed to cool this engine in the first place and work with all the other system components that we're going to reuse on this truck. So at this point, it's a lot cheaper for us to reuse the Dodge stuff and recycle and trim a little bit of sheet.
After verifying that our sheet metal surgery was successful and the radiator fit, well, we tried to mock it up on the vehicle. After hanging the inner aprons and the header panel, we dropped the radiator down in place. And even though it fit, well, it was quickly becoming apparent that we weren't going to have enough room for the intercooler and AC condenser. We were also going to have issues with mounting locations and clearance for the radiator cap. It was just going to end up being a hodgepodge of parts. So it was on to Plan B. So after removing the Ford header panel, we quickly assembled the Dodge core support with the radiator, condenser, and intercooler.
Feeling lucky? Yes. Okay. Okay.
Yeah, a little more trimming on these inner fenders. We'll be able to pull this up within a ½ inch of that fan. And we'll have to figure out where to latch the hood later. I see hood pins in the future.
I think so.
And with the core support sitting in the stock Dodge frame mounts, we took a measurement back to the fan. Then we took that measurement and got to work relocating the body mounts. Now we used the cutoff wheel as much as possible for a nice clean cut. Now since the frame tapers in just past the stock mount, we knew we had to flatten it out. And that involved some rectangular tubing and a little bit more cutting. I'll take 2 of them, please. Now, Kevin's method of cutting a slight curve into the tubing using the cutoff wheel is a smart one. He's doing repetitive grooves a little bit deeper and deeper each time. You don't want to force the blade in there and try to turn it. The wheel will shatter and become a spinning wheel of death and destruction. Now, prior to cutting the stock mounts off, we took some before measurements, not only to get the correct setback of the mount, but also so we could place it at the correct height. You don't want these going on crooked. It'll just affect everything else you stack on top of them.
That ought to work.
Nice. Got clearance and everything.
Heck yeah.
Hey guys, welcome back to the shop. Well, with our cooling systems in place, we went ahead and hung the fenders so we could try to reinstall the grill, make sure everything lines up. Cross my fingers, my side's in good shape.
Well, it looks like the only thing that's keeping us from a perfect fit is this flange right here on the grill. It's coming into contact with a condenser. We can trim this down and it's gonna be great. We're gonna have plenty of hood clearance, and our module from the Dodge works perfect in this Ford doghouse. That's awesome.
Get lucky every once in a while.
Yep.
Well, now that we've established that our cooling setup's gonna work and the grill's gonna fit with a little bit of modification, we've still got another issue. We've got to tie the inner and outer fender together and come up with a way to attach it to the Dodge core support. So what our plan is to cut some sections out of the Ford core support. And that'll tie the inner and outer fenders together. Slight modification, and it'll bolt up to the Dodge core support. Add a few gussets, and we'll be in good shape. But in typical hot rodder fashion, one solution led to another problem. Now we've got to figure out a way to incorporate a hood latch. We'll cross that bridge later.
Now, you may have noticed we weren't very careful trimming these inner fenders or aprons out. That's because they're beat up, they're damaged, they're rusty, and they're stress cracked, and they're done. So we got a new pair from LMC Truck. They ship just like you see them. They come with the EDP coating already on, which stands for electrodeposition primer, which is electrostatically applied to the metal, making it very strong and a very thorough corrosion protection. So these will probably outlast the vehicle. And we're going to utilize the existing bolt hole locations. That way, if we have to do any service on this vehicle, it's a simple procedure. Now, this is a process I refer to as whittling, because you don't want to cut too much off. Now, we're saving the upper tie bar for a couple of different reasons. Number one, it houses the latch. Number two, it gives us the correct spacing between the fenders. After loosely bolting in the Ford core support to retain our fender spacing, we set the Dodge cooling module up into the relocated mounting tabs and do a trace line around the outside edge so we can see what else we have to trim off the Ford core support. Basically, this is a process of refinement and a lot of trial and error. Following our trace lines, we're trimming back a little bit more to get a flush fit from the Ford core support to the Dodge radiator support. The other piece of real estate that was keeping us from a flush fit were the ears that mount normally to the Dodge fenders. They're going away. We want to go up and in with that cap.
So after a quick test fit, we decided that two tie bars weren't going to work, and the Ford one had to go.
It's, yeah, no.
And after whittling down the Ford header panel even more, we made two separate pieces and kept the sections that fasten to the fenders and the inner aprons. Now, as far as attaching to the Dodge core support goes, well, we're still working on that plan.
Just like that. Well, that mocked up great. We'll clean this up, cap these off, weld our Ford support to the Dodge support. Our upper tie bar is still removable. This is working out really well.
Hey guys, welcome back to the shop. Now we've got our Dodge cooling system roughly grafted into our Ford sheet metal, But we still got the factory Ford steel inner aprons in place. That's because we got some work to do to the firewall. We've got the steering column and brake booster and master cylinder to install, along with the clutch master cylinder and even the wiring harness. And there may be some interference between those items and our inner fenders here. So we may have to do some trimming for clearance. And once we do all that and get it all mocked up, we can transfer our measurements over to our LMC replacement inner fenders and get them installed. And speaking of steering columns, check these out. Now, despite these steering columns being separated by about 20 years, they're actually quite similar with just a few subtle differences. They both have mounting brackets that attach to the pedal assembly and to the firewall. And luckily for us, the distance between the steering wheel and this mounting flange is just about identical on both columns, meaning we won't have any awkward steering wheel placement issues. It'll sit right where it needs to. Now the Dodge column, well, it's a tilt wheel. It's got the combination wiper and turn signal switch. The ignition switch is built into the column, and the steering wheel even has the cruise control switches right on it, making it really convenient. But before we start installing this, we've got some work to do on the wrecked Dodge cab. What we're doing is removing this reinforcement plate. Now, the reason manufacturers use these reinforcement plates is because even if they used a thicker single layer of sheet metal for the firewall, well, repetitive use of the brake, clutch, and throttle would eventually fatigue the sheet metal, causing it to crack. And they don't want it going anywhere either. After drilling out the dozen or so spot welds, we eventually pried off the firewall.
Wasn't so hard, was it? Got it.
Before installing the reinforcement plate, we had to clean up the firewall a little bit. And that meant getting all the wiring harness from the original Ford out of the way so we had room to work.
Now the Ford firewall has the same double reinforced panel. We're just going to trim the ears off and put the Dodge piece right over top. Pretty obvious this is going to work out fairly well, but we do have to trim the Dodge piece at the Ford's pinch weld. Now we created a horizon line to make sure that everything sits on the firewall level. This is no big deal. This is just a little more whittling and trimming. Now with the plate in its final position, using the studs for the internal pedal box as a locator, we can do our final trimming for the brake booster and for the steering column. Now, if you're keeping up with the tools that we're using to perform this surgery, you've probably noticed that short of this pneumatic saw, they're all Matco tools that you probably already got in your toolbox. So it just goes to show you that the most important tool in your shop is probably between your ears. Now with the location of the reinforcement plate locked in, the next thing to do was to drill out the holes through the firewall that mount the power brake booster. Now that's going to allow us to finally do a test fit on the Hydro Boost bracket, the master cylinder, and the steering column to see what kind of clearance we had in the engine bay.
All right, well, our Hydro Boost brake booster and master cylinder are going to work, but barely. We only have about 1/2 of an inch of clearance between the master cylinder reservoir and the air intake. And the way this diesel engine is going to move around under torque, we're going to want a little bit more clearance than that. So we're going to have to get creative and see what we can come up with. Either way, this reinforcement plate from the wrecked Dodge is saving us a lot of time and a lot of fabrication work.
Hey, welcome back. Well, now that we know where our cooling is going to be, we went ahead and committed to locking it in place and welding the Ford support to the Dodge cooling module framework. And we did a kind of a cool old school custom trick by blending the two pieces in, making it look a little more factory, using 1/4-inch steel rod and 20-gauge sheet metal. Now, the first thing I did was to place the steel rod, bend it by hand, and tack it in place on the edge of the support. Then what you do is take your 20 gauge and you tack it on top of the rod. The important thing to remember is to leave as much of the circular rod exposed as you can. That way you take advantage of that perfect rounded rolled edge and it creates a stamped look. Now we'll prime and block that and paint it with some semi-gloss black paint, and it'll look factory original. Now back here, we've got the Hydro Boost mounted to the Dodge backing plate, which is rosette welded to the Ford firewall. And the steering column and steering shaft are installed, but as you can see, the shaft is not quite long enough. Not a problem, because it's round right here. We can sleeve it to the length that we need and still retain the slip shaft feature, which is a nice safety feature, just in case something bad happens. But where this really starts coming together is inside the cab. Take a look. Now the Dodge pedal box is a cast aluminum piece that's held in place with the 4 studs from the Hydro Boost mount that pinch the firewall in between the two. The steering column is bolted to the pedal box and again to the 3 studs from the backing plate that we pulled out of the Dodge cab. But the cool thing about all of this is the pedal placement and orientation to the steering column stays exactly the same, just like the factory designed it. So we don't have to re-engineer any of this stuff. And if you're thinking that this looks a little goofy with the column sticking out too far, well, check this out. Now with the Ford dash set into place, you can kind of see where we're going. And if you remember, the Dodge cluster fits inside the Ford dash. The important thing though is that the steering wheel is exactly where it needs to be. I've got plenty of room between me and the column and the wheel itself, and I can see straight out the middle of the Ford windshield just like the factory intended. Obviously, this crusty seat is going away, and we're going to do some other interior improvements to get rid of the rat's nest look in here. We're going to modernize this truck and make it way cool. So the name Super Dually, it's not just a name.
Today, our Ford Dodge Hybrid tow rig is getting even closer to reality. We're putting in an extended steering shaft, new headlight buckets, paint under the hood, and planning out a new exhaust for Project Super Dually. It's all today here on Trucks.
Hey guys, welcome to Trucks. Well, we've got our little Super Dually back in the shop. That's because we've made good progress on our other long-term projects. Our 49 Chevy Class 6 is just about finished up, and Rolling Thunder is coming along nicely. But we didn't want to get ahead of ourselves because we're gonna need something to tow it with. So that's why we made some room for our hybrid Ford Dodge pickup truck. Now we're gonna get started by trying to hook up our swapped-in Dodge steering column, do something about this mess of wires, and see if we can get our Dodge instrument cluster fit into the Ford dash.
And just because we got a nice slick coat of paint on the outside doesn't mean that we're done with the painting, because we want it to look as good when we open the hood as it does with the hood closed. So we're going to replace these nasty hold-up wrinkled aprons with some brand new ones we got from LMC. And our hybrid core support, well, it needs a bit of primer and a bit of paint. Also, some of the early 79 trucks had the round headlights, as did ours. We want to convert to the square headlights. So we picked up these buckets from LMC, but because we got a little bit of a mixture here, we're going to have to do some fabrication. It's no big deal. We'll show you how.
Now with the doghouse out of the way, it's a lot easier to get to these parts. Now if you remember, the steering column that we swapped into this old Ford was the Dodge steering column. We've got it attached to the Dodge steering shaft. We've obviously got the Dodge steering box down on the frame. Now the steering shaft itself is collapsible, and that's a safety feature. Should you ever get into a head-on collision, well, that steering shaft will collapse instead of sending it through the cab and turning you into a steering shaft kebab. So that's definitely a feature we want to retain. Now it should be pretty simple. We're just going to come in here, lengthen the lower portion of this shaft by about 5 or 6 inches. Should be a piece of cake. Now when picking a spot to make the cut on our steering shaft, we couldn't just pick it at random. We had a couple of things to consider. First, we have to leave room for the steering shaft to actually collapse. And second, well, this joint is isolated by rubber to dampen vibrations. And we're obviously going to have to do some welding, so we don't want to put too much heat too close to that rubber. Now, since steering is kind of an important part on a vehicle, well, we don't want to skimp on this fix. So we picked up some DOM that matches the outside diameter of our steering shaft and then sleeved it with some smaller diameter tubing. That way, we can both plug weld it and perimeter weld it, making this fix stronger than the rest of the steering shaft and something we can feel secure with.
Now, just like a drive shaft, a steering shaft's U-joints are indexed, and we want to make sure it goes back together the way it came apart. So we drew a line down the steering shaft so we can make sure it did. Now, the plug welds are obviously from a MIG welder, but we switched over to TIG welding to do the rest of it. And that's for a couple of reasons. One, we want to limit the heat input. Remember, we've got a rubber isolated U-joint. And two, well, it limits the amount of post-weld cleanup. We don't have to sand this down to make it look good. A quick coat of paint will handle that. Now, we could have ordered up a custom steering shaft, but that would have cost money. This just cost us about 30 minutes of our time and some scrap materials. And don't forget your Loctite on bolts like these. You're gonna need it. Cool.
Now, like we told you, we're updating from the rounder early '78 headlights to the more modern and more visible square headlights. And normally, this would be just a bolt-in thing. We wouldn't even waste your time with it on TV. However, with our hybrid core support, it becomes a little bit more of an issue. Check it out. Now, we know our headlight bucket's in the right place because of the tab on the grille and the bottom bolts locating it. But these two tabs normally bolt into the top of the Ford radiator support, which has changed. So what we're going to do is get rid of these guys, make a nice top cover plate, and bolt it into these two existing bolt holes and try and get a factory look out of it. With the tabs cut off, we're going to make this really simple. Just using a simple cardstock template, I'm going to locate onto the two existing core support bolts. Even though this is simple, it's going to be very effective and do exactly what we want it to do. But first, we'll grind the top of the headlight bucket to bare steel because we're attaching our support plate with rosette welds. Now, utilizing existing bolts is nothing new. It just makes things easier, and it keeps you from guessing where those bolt holes need to be and making sloppy adjustments. With it tightened down, we know exactly where our rosette welds need to be. Once we know the welds are good, we'll dress them down with a 24 grit disc just to tidy it up and make it look a little more finished. So now our headlight bucket is mounted rock solid with factory fasteners, and more importantly, we can aim it so we can see at night, and the bucket itself is removable, and it didn't really take us that much longer to do it the right way. Hey, welcome back to Trucks. We're working on Project Super Dually, making sure that when we open up the hood, everything looks as slick, shiny, and professional as the rest of the paint job. Now, we like it when you guys comment on the shows. We listen to it because it helps us make better shows. One comment that we hear out on the street over and over and over again is that you make it look too easy on TV. Well, we're taking that to heart. We're going to slow down and show you the process and show you the problem solving. Because even if you have all this big bad equipment, you still run into trouble. And I've always said that the biggest difference between a paint gun owner and a painter is the ability to solve the problems that you run into. So we're going to take a little more time, show you all the steps that it takes to eliminate the problems before they start. And that starts with these panels right here. These aprons are brand new from LMC, and they come with this EDP coating on them. You might be saying to yourself, why prep that? It looks like a top coat. Well, a couple of different reasons. It's very thin. It's a good primer, but it's a thin primer. Look right here. Even with the scuff pad, I'm burning through the edge. And right here, this scratch, when I go to feather and level that scratch out, well, I'm down to bare steel. So don't listen to the internet forums that say you got to strip all of this to bare metal. You don't. But you do have to prep it properly and get it ready for a coat of sealer and then paint. Now, these hood hinges are prepped in the media blast cabinet. We've got aluminum oxide beads that profile the metal nicely and strip the paint. They're prepped completely, so we don't need the red scuffing pad on these. However, I'm wearing gloves. Your bare fingers will leave skin oils and acids on top of this stuff, and it'll cause hot spots, fingerprints coming through, and it'll make a mess. Your paint could literally bubble and flake off. So whenever you're handling fresh blasted parts or raw steel parts, wear some gloves. Now, these are our new headlight buckets, and they consist of E-coated metal and raw steel that we use for the top mount of the bucket itself. Now, we need to cover these up with a primer that's compatible to both surfaces, and we'll talk more about that later, but check this out. Right here is where I marked to drill my holes for the mounting bolts. Now, we used an ink marker for these. We use these a lot in here, and I use it a lot in my shop at home. However, I've learned the hard way that if you prime over top of that, that ink is very strong, and it can wick up through your paint. Like I said, I've paid the price for that lesson. So if you're going to use an ink marker for marking out and templating, that's fine. You can use it all day long. Just make sure that you get rid of that ink before you go through the painting and priming process. Now this is the factory intercooler that's going back in Super Dually. It's powder coated from the factory, doesn't look too bad, but it's got a couple of nicks on it, so we're going to shoot it just for good measure so it looks nice. However, before you touch it with a scuff pad, remember, this thing's been in a diesel truck with over 100,000 miles on it. It's coated in this schmutz, this diesel fuel stuff that's going to react with your paint. So before you prep, you got to pre-clean. Now, every paint manufacturer known to man has their own version of a pre-cleaner. So does Summit, and it's a good one. But we're going to use it in this pump sprayer instead of out of the can, so we don't pour it all over the floor. Pump sprayer is really nice because you can build pressure. It's non-aerosol, so it's environmentally safe, and it allows you to do this and soak that layer of contamination off of your parts. Look at that. That's diesel fuel. You do not want to put paint over top of that. Look at that. So what you want to do is repeat that process until your rag is completely clean when you pull it off of there. And then, only then, are you ready for a scuffing pad. Now I've prepped every single piece that we're going to spray, short of the sandblasted stuff, with a red scuffing pad. These are color coded, the red being the most coarse. It's going to give us the tooth that we want for the primer and then the paint to stick. But there's some other tools that you might want to keep around your paint or your body shop. Single edge razor blades, well, they can really come in handy for detail masking, like we're going to have to do on these ID tags. We want to preserve this information, so we'll just trim the masking tape around them. Next time you see these parts, we'll show you how to put a great paint job right over top. Oops, got a holiday. See, problem, we showed you. Hey, welcome back to Trucks. We've got all our parts mounted, wiped down, scuffed down, tacked, everything's ready to shoot. Now, let's talk about what we're going to put on top of it. Since we've got Summit Racing's paint system on the body of Super Dually, we're going to stay with that theme, starting off with their epoxy primer, which is a great ground coat coating for both bare metal and prepped painted parts. On top of that, we're going to use their Hot Rod Black, which is a true urethane, meaning it's got a catalyst, so it'll be really strong. Plus, with a semi-flat, it'll have a nice, sexy sheen. It'll look really good. I've already got my sealer mixed into the cup. We're ready to shoot. One more thing. This, well, it's a good dust mask. It's not paint protection. Okay, I've got all the parts tacked off, but look at this paint booth. Look at the hose. Look at the filters. Between Rick and Tim Strange with Search and Restore and Muscle Car, messy Marvins. Sorry, guys, you just are. Use an old tack rag. Tack your air hose off. Epoxy makes a great sealer for a couple of different reasons. Not only does it stick extremely well to both painted, powder-coated, and bare steel parts, but it's also got a several-day-long open window to where you don't even have to sand it to top coat. Now, whenever you're painting a radiator or an AC coolant system like this, don't overcoat it. Give it a mist coat. You want the paint to stick. You don't want to restrict any kind of an airflow. So use a light touch. Now we're getting great coverage with just a single coat with this sealer, so there's no need to double coat. It just adds time to the drying and to the curing process. However, when you're working with bare steel parts like these hood hinges, make sure that you flex the hinges and cover all the bare steel. You've only got one chance to seal, and the top coat may not stick to the sandblasted metal. And as much of a fashion statement as the sexy blue gloves are, they're there for your protection. Just get used to wearing them. The sealer needs to sit for 30 minutes before we top coat. That's just about enough time to clean your paint gun and mix your paint, which is a 3-step system: paint, catalyst, and reducer in a 4-to-1-to-1 ratio. It's 4 parts paint, 1 part catalyst, 1 part reducer. And I don't guess it's 100% necessary to tack off these parts just because they're underhood parts, brackets and stuff. It's a great habit to get into to run a tack rag over your work pieces, because it gives you one final opportunity to make sure your parts are ready for paint and give it one final inspection. Now with this paint, of course it's black, it covers extremely well, but we're putting 2 coats on because that's what the P-sheet says. Now just like with the sealer, on the intercooler and the AC condenser, I'm just painting the hard metal parts and staying off of the fins. You don't want to build the paint up or restrict airflow. The rest of it, 2 full wet coats. That way it flows out nicely and you get the strength and protection that you need from a 2-coat catalyzed system. Now, as goofy as the safety gear looks, it allows me to focus on painting, and that's what we're doing in the paint booth. Think about it. Okay, here's one of those instances where not everything goes right. I'm out of paint, and I'm not done painting. A quick little overmix, and we're gonna be fine. It's fresh enough to where it'll blend back in, but you know, you just gotta expect it sometimes.
Hey guys, welcome back to the shop. Now this blower cover plate that Kevin was painting turned out great. The problem is, while he was out there making it look good, I was in here making the executive decision that we were gonna ditch this entire Ford HVAC box. So Kevin, good operation, but the patient died. Now we're going with the Dodge HVAC box for a couple of reasons. One, it's a lot more compact than all this Ford mess. And two, we're gonna have direct connections to both our AC and our heater lines, and more importantly, the wiring harness. So the only challenge we have is making this fit in the Ford firewall. Now speaking of wiring harness, check this out. Like we told you, we want to keep the steel Ford dash, but we also want to use the Dodge instrument cluster because the wiring harness plugs right into it. So we've got to come up with a way for the two to work together. And what we did, we trimmed the bezel portion out of the rest of the Dodge dash, and we can use it, come in here and make a flat filler plate so we can recess the cluster and this trim panel into it. We'll have a little extra real estate over here. Maybe we can put a couple of gauges or a dash vent in there. Either way, it should look pretty sharp. For now, we want to show you something else we want to add to this Cummins Ford Dodge truck. Now on our 97 Dodge, well, here's all that's left of the factory exhaust system. It's just the downpipe, not even a muffler. Now it is 3 inches in diameter, and that sounds like a pretty good size, especially you guys used to gas engine exhaust system sizes. But diesels flow a lot of air, and we plan on making a fair amount of power. So we wanted to upgrade to a 4-inch system from Flowmaster that we picked up from Summit Racing. Now the flange will hook directly to our factory installed turbo, but it quickly necks up to the full 4-inch diameter. Now for a muffler, we picked up a 4-inch Flowmaster Pro Series. And with its cool shell design, it will keep the heat inside of the exhaust system instead of radiating and heat soaking everything around it. This Pro Series muffler will also give us moderate to aggressive sound levels outside of the truck, but it will limit interior resonance. Now, if you've ever spent any real time in a car or pickup truck that has a lot of exhaust drone, it can wear you out, make you tired, and drive you crazy. So that's something we want to avoid since we're going to be spending a lot of time inside this Ford pickup. And since this 4-inch aluminized system is completely mandrel bent, it should support multiple power levels, including where we are right now. The factory 5.9 in the 97 pickups is rated at 215 horsepower. And with the mild modifications we've made to the engine so far, we should just be a little bit better than that. Now, since we're not making a competitive sled puller out of this truck, we're just after a solid but powerful tow rig, well, a 4-inch system should be plenty. Now to finish things off, it's got a nice polished 5-inch tip, which makes it almost as big as your teenage neighbor's 4-cylinder Honda muffler. But it should look nice, especially alongside our super slick gray and blue paint job. Guys, thanks for watching Trucks. See you next week, and check us out on PowerBlockTV.com.
Today, we're working hard, wiring, plumbing, and installing gauges on Project Super Dually, our 79 Ford F-350 body that we've mounted on a 97 Cummins-powered Dodge chassis that's been converted to a dually. It's all today here on Trucks.
Hey guys, welcome to Trucks. Well, today we're back on Project Super Dually, our 79 Ford crew cab body that we've got sitting on top of our 97 Dodge diesel chassis. Now we're at the point in this project where all the big pieces are there and we've just got some finish work to do, hooking up the steering and the brakes and doing some plumbing and wiring. Now those things tend to soak up a lot of time, but the good news for us is we've got some help in the shop today.
Now, you guys remember TC Pennick from Bay 1 Customs. Well, TC did such a knockout job on Project Class 6 that we somehow managed to talk him into coming here to the truck shop and helping us out on Super Dually. Because like Ryan said, even though 80% of the big chunks are on, the last 20% take 80% of the time. And it sure is nice to have a skilled set of hands here helping us out. Now, to fill in the ridiculously large vacancy the Ford heater box left, TC decided to use 20-gauge sheet metal.
By the time this is all cleaned up, it'll look a lot like the factory roll that's around all the factory holes in the firewall. All right, good enough.
The rolled edge not only looks original, but it also builds strength into the metal. That fits pretty good, man.
Like it was made for it, huh?
Now, TC's no stranger to custom work. In fact, he can do just about anything he sets his mind to. And the first order of business was to mock up the Dodge heater box in the Ford dash, figure out where the outlets go. With that all done and a little bit more strength rolled into the metal, a coat of paint makes it look OE. Now, you can always find a way around a two-person job, but it's actually nice to have two people sometimes. To finish it off, we put a coat of seam seal around the inside edge to keep it weatherproof. Now, this is the original radiator from the Dodge pickup that we got to do this conversion. There was front-end collision damage and frame repair that needed to be done, and you can see signs of that. Here's the clutch fan, here's the marks from the blades, and obviously it's gotten into the core, into the vanes, and right here, you can see that it was actually leaking. We knew this going in. Now it's time to get a new radiator, so we called rockauto.com and got this drop-in replacement since we're using all of the original Dodge cooling module. Now, this is something you're going to run into if you're working on vehicles that have been wrecked before, or you just lose something in the process of a project that takes a long time. This is the bracket that holds the intercooler into place. It bolts in to the bottom of the core support. Now, there's left and right. They're mirror image. So since I don't have one, and I don't have time to go down to the parts dealership and buy one, I'm just going to make it. That process is pretty darn simple. What you do, well, it's pretty obvious. You can take cardboard, template it, and then flip it around, and basically you just make your mirror image to where between the two pieces like this, now I've got my left and my right. So from there, trace it up flat onto some flat stock, use the dimple die to make the strength. Viola, new Dodge parts. Using a heavier 18-gauge steel, we made the hole stronger using a flared hole die or a dimple die we picked up from Light Racing. Then it's off to the brake to make the bends. The whole time we're paying attention to our template and checking it against just to get the correct angles. Now, if you don't have bending brakes and dimple dies, you can still do this. A bench vise and a hammer will get you just about anywhere you want to go. Coat of paint and a test fit show us that this is actually going to work.
Very nice.
Well, thank you. Now, it feels pretty darn good to know that we've gone past the mock-up phase and that this is actually our final fit. Our cooling module is locked into place, including the brand new radiator. But the radiator's not the only thing we got from rockauto.com. We also had them send us a new heater core and brand new OE-style replacement power steering hoses, as well as these molded radiator hoses from Gates. And that's one of the cool things about rockauto.com and our truck. Since most of the drivetrain is factory Dodge running gear, one phone call to Rock Auto gets us everything we need. First thing we got to do, put this heater core in before we can hang the HVAC box. TC, you ready? Yep. If you've ever replaced a heater core, you know that it's much easier to do with the whole HVAC box out of the vehicle. So the timing couldn't be better for replacing the heater core in this one. With the ports for the hoses drilled and the mounting location secure in the firewall, now's the time to finally hang the heater box, hopefully for the last time. One final test fit is putting the old dash over top of the newer, more modern heater box. And with a little bit of whittling and trimming, this seems to fit pretty good too. Nobody's going to be able to tell that that's all that modern stuff under there.
It's been quite a bit of modifying there, but it looks good.
We'll even have a glove box, won't we?
Oh, we will.
Cool, cool, cool. Nice work, man.
Hey guys, welcome back to Trucks, where we're buttoning up some odds and ends on Project Super Dually. Now, with the Ford bed sitting down on the Dodge frame, we weren't able to completely install the fuel tank because the top of the tank was hitting this bed support rail. And rather than pry our wallets open and spend big bucks on a custom fuel tank just to avoid this clearance issue, we took the easy way out. Just made a relief cut in the support rail. Then we'll just come in here, use this bent piece of sheet metal, fill it in, we'll have the clearance we need. And we can run the stock tank. Now, this project here is Metalworking 101. Just a simple piece of flat sheet metal bent to follow the contours that I've cut in the bed rail and then tack welded all the way around the perimeter. And the great thing about a project like this is that it's on the underside of the bed. If it doesn't turn out perfect, oh, no big deal. Now the top side of this bed was all taken care of when we did the auto body thrash, but the bottom side was kind of neglected. So I've knocked the big chunks of scaly rust off with a wire brush and a scuff pad. I'm going over top of it and brushing on some Eastwood rust converter. That's going to transform this rust into a paintable surface. And once it dries, we can go over top of it with some sort of bedliner or undercoating and lock it in.
This stuff brushes on pretty easily, and you don't have to be too careful. Now, one spot on the bed floor we didn't have to treat is right here in the middle. It was preserved by a leaky pinion seal that didn't allow the metal to rust. Now, with the rust converter completely cured, you can see that it's turned the bottom of the bed floor from rust red to a black color. And that means it's converted the rust to a zinc phosphate, which is safe to coat over top of. And that's exactly what we're going to do using this Duplicolor bed armor. Now, this is the same material we used on the inside of the bed, but this time we're going to use it as an undercoating. Now, we could have just painted the bottom of this bed with some spray paint, but undercoating not only covers up imperfections, but it also absorbs impacts a little bit. So any rock chips will just deflect instead of chipping off paint, leaving exposed metal. Now, we've sprayed bedliner on the inside of our fenders as well, and that'll prevent any rocks that get thrown up from our tires from causing damage to the sheet metal and causing a paint chip. Now, before we drop the bed in place, we want to make our final connections to the fuel tank, electrical and fuel lines. Now, the fuel lines in the engine bay have been capped and protected, but these ends back here, they've been open to the atmosphere. So just in case any dust or debris got back in the lines, we want to make sure they're blown out, flushed, and clean. So we're going to blow some pressurized air through them and make sure they're flushed out. Now, diesel fuel doesn't evaporate quite like gasoline does. Like I said, these have been open for a while. Well, we hope there's not too much fuel in them. Either way, they've got to be flushed before we hook them up to our kind of expensive diesel engine. That should do it. One, two, done. And now we've got all the clearance we need, and we still got to use our stock tank.
Hey, welcome back to Trucks. Well, now it's time to start wrestling with the wiring harness, but we got a little problem to fix first. Well, the good news is that the radiator and location of the engine is in the right place. All the hoses fit, and the boost tubes, it looks like we're not going to have to change or alter them. The bad news is that the boost tube is hitting my fresh painted apron. I hate when that happens. However, this is a single wall panel, and, you know, a little bit of trimming, we can get that fixed, put some kind of an edge around there, make it look nice and neat, solve the problem. Now, sometimes, no matter how much planning and mocking up you do, you still have to do a little bit of trimming. So that's what we're doing here. Now, the masking tape is to protect the painted surface while I bring my saw around the corner. Keep this in mind. You can always cut more off. I'm trimming the bare minimum here, hoping I can get by. If not, I can trim some more. It's a lot harder to put it back. And obviously, I need a little more space. One of the great things about that giant truck we're working on is that we didn't really have to disassemble anything to have enough clearance and room to make the cuts we needed. On a smaller vehicle, this wouldn't have been the case, but we kind of lucked out here. The boost tubes and the couplers are stock and they're in great shape, so they're still tight. A Matco radiator hose tool really does the trick when we're reassembling. That gives me the clearance I need. A little piece of vacuum line on this hard edge. We're done.
Now, back when we disassembled our donor Dodge pickup truck, we were smart enough to label a lot of the connectors on the harness and label where the harness lays out in the engine bay. But we didn't label everything, and we wanted to make sure we've got it correct. So we bought in this 94 Dodge. It's virtually stock to use as a reference. Now, engineers spend a lot of time laying the harness out in the engine bay so it doesn't rest on anything hot or hit anything that moves. So we wanted to mimic that and save ourselves any potential headaches in the future.
For me, to simplify it a little bit, is I start with what I know, and then you just work your way out from there. You know, as you go along, you'll find your headlight ends, your alternator wiring, and you can lay it out. And the more you install, the easier it gets, because every wire is dedicated to a certain spot.
Hey, welcome back to Trucks. Well, it feels great to have Project Super Dually so close to being a functional vehicle again. One of the last details that we're doing on this truck to make it a complete vehicle is to lay the Dodge wiring harness, the whole thing inside the Ford body, which is a solution in itself. However, it does create a couple of problems and a couple of challenges. Here's what I'm talking about. Now, this is the original 79 Ford gauge cluster out of the cab that we've got. Now, it's obviously a challenge to get all of these gauges to read the senders from the Dodge, especially since it's a computerized vehicle and the Ford was not, especially when it comes to the speedometer. This is a mechanical speedometer. Our Dodge has an electronic speedometer. Now, I guess you could use part of the Ford wiring harness and splice in or read your schematics, and I'm sure somebody out there has done that. However, it just makes that much more sense to use the Dodge cluster, especially when you consider that there's two multi-pin connectors that automatically connect all these senders and gauges together, including the speedometer, making it just a shoe-in, especially since we're using, like we said, the entire Dodge harness. Now, mounting this into the Ford dash, well, that's a bit of a challenge, and that's where good old-fashioned hot rodding comes into play. Here's something I wanted to show you, and the way we solved that problem. Plastics of some kind have always been used in vehicle construction. As vehicles have gotten newer, the composite and plastic content has gotten greater. Case in point, this is the bezel from the gauge cluster of the Dodge truck, which we trimmed from this piece here. The truth is, most of the interior off of that 97 Dodge was made out of this plastic. So we want to take the cluster and install it in the Ford dash. Well, the Ford dash is mostly metal, and you know you can't take a MIG welder and weld up metal to the plastic. So there's your challenge. How do you join these two pieces together? Well, there's an answer for that. If you remember the Second Chance Silverado, we literally glued on one of the bedsides when we did that vehicle. It's called panel bonding adhesives, and they're just as strong as a weld if you prep it correctly. This is a PBA that we're using. This is a Norton Speed Grip. This has got a 40-minute set time, flows out nicely, and it doesn't even matter what brand. There's all kinds of brands and options for you. And literally, this is what we did. I used a combination of MIG welding and bonding adhesives. Welding when I had a metal-to-metal joint, bonding adhesives with a plastic-to-metal joint. And it creates a combination of the two that is permanent, attractive, and very strong. Now, this is the simplest of techniques. Literally is a bolt through a hole on some 20 gauge. Tack the end, grind the head off, make a nice flange, and it allows me to now mount my switch plate and house the HVAC controls. Now, over on this side, we house the headlight switch, which is screwed in from the backside of the Dodge truck. So I just used a measuring tape, made a flange here, some basic sheet metal bending skills, welded it together, utilized the holes that are in the existing switch, and now it's removable and permanently installed. Now, for the cluster, I've got a simple tab at either side on the bottom that just holds it in place, and it gets bolted in at the top, here and here. What you have is a removable finished cluster with all the controls we need. Now, as fun as this looks here, it looks even cooler in the vehicle. Now, with the dash cluster in place, you can kind of see how this is starting to play out. It looks like it's supposed to look. The dash pad covers about a third of it. Some exposed fasteners will be very forgiving, and it looks like it belongs there. And everything is going to work, just like the Chrysler engineers had intended it to work, down to the cruise control buttons and the horns. Heck, we could even put an airbag in there if we wanted to. But here's the real message here. Don't be afraid to try stuff. Try some adhesives, try some welding techniques, break out your fab equipment. This is not that difficult. All it takes is thinking it through and following through with your thoughts. It's hot rodding. Hey, welcome back. Well, since we're on kind of a diesel theme, we thought it was high time we got back to work on Project Super Dually, our body-swapped 79 Ford sitting on top of a 97 Dodge chassis with the bulletproof 12-valve Cummins turbo diesel under the hood. Now, we're almost ready to fire this thing up, with the exception of a few housekeeping duties, one of them being some kind of an air intake system. Now, the mashup of these two trucks has worked surprisingly well, with a lot of stuff falling into place, or nearly so, with the exception of this area right here, which was taken up by the huge HVAC box from the Ford cab. Now, obviously, Ford didn't factor in the presence of a giant inline six with a turbo snail hanging off the side, so the box had to go away. Fortunately, the Dodge system fits under the dash conveniently behind the Ford's firewall. Now we have room for the turbo. But the factory intake system for this turbocharger interferes with the Ford apron, so we find ourselves again having to do something a little bit different. Now, we had such great luck with the air raid system on the C10 swap that we thought we'd go back to air raid and see what kind of options they gave us for Super Dually. The first one being this standard cold air kit for 94 to 02 Dodge Cummins trucks. It comes with your plastic ductwork, an isolator, and an additional heat shield since it's so close to the turbo. All the hardware you need to mount it, as well as this giant honkin' reusable air filter that has the correct amount of surface area to get the proper amount of air into this engine. Besides the fact that this system is CARB certified, if you need to pay attention to that. But it's not the only option that Air Raid has for us, or you. Air Raid has just recently come out with their UBI system, which stands for You Build It. It comes with everything you see here, including a giant filter, a filter mount, several different coupler options, a bag of hardware, brackets, and clamps that you can use to create the system that you need. But the coolest thing is right here. This is a high-strength ABS plastic ductwork with different shapes and different angles with these ribs engineered in. What you do is cut in between the ribs and you've got something to where the coupler can clamp to and it won't slip off. Obviously, you've got tons of options to create the system that you need in a unique application. And by the way, if you send them a picture of the system that you created, they'll send you some free swag. Now, this is a great option, but what we're going to try and do is make the OE system fit first. Now, what's good about something that fits the original equipment is that we know 100% that it's going to fit the turbo and clear the alternator. And like any other mock-up, we're going to leave it loose so we can move things around for the best fitment. The OE cold air kit comes with an isolation box, but we're going to leave that off because we know that real estate is drastically different under the hood now. Now, the good thing about this air raid filter is that it's not symmetrical, and we can fool around with the shape of that to make it fit the clearances that we have to work within. Now, somewhere in there, that gives us the option we want. We can create a mount off here. The OE filter box is out of the question, so we're going to have to figure some kind of isolation between the turbo and the filter, but we can deal with that later. For now, this works.
Today, we're back on Project Super Dually. We're adding running lights and getting our Ford head and tail lights to operate using our Dodge wiring harness. It's all today here on Trucks.
Hey guys, welcome to Trucks. Well, today we're back on Project Super Dually, and we're finally making some real progress on this beast. In fact, it starts and moves around the shop. And the last time it did that, well, it was a long time ago and kind of looked a little different.
Now, with the right front wheel being stuffed into the cab, we kind of had our suspicions about maybe a slight bit of frame damage. But despite all of that, this truck runs great and pulled itself under the lift, no problem.
So now that we got this truck up and running, it's time for us to start focusing on the things that'll make it road ready, like merging the Dodge chassis wiring harness with the Ford lights. We also need to get some clearance lights on this thing across the roof and on the dually fenders, and we obviously need to hang a couple of bumpers off this thing, so we've got some work to do.
Now, clearance lights give us a heavy-duty look that, quite frankly, we just wanted for this truck. But clearance lights on the dually fenders, well, it's a regulation, so it's important to have. But across the cab, we went to LMC Truck and got this kit here. It comes with cool-looking lights, gaskets. The lights have their own bulbs and harness, as well as a switch that kind of matches the dated look of the Ford dash, along with screws and a fuse link, everything that you need to install them. But you can't just go randomly screwing holes into the top of the sheet metal. You got to start with the layout, and that starts with a marker, some tape. Obviously, we want a balanced look, which means finding the center point of the roof and doing our layout based on that. Here's an easy way to do it. Don't stretch the tape, but utilize drip rail to drip rail, fold it in half, and your center point reveals itself. Now we're using a standard configuration of lights on a lot of dually cabs, which is a grouping of 3 in the middle and 1 on each corner. So we're simply laying out the gaskets to see what looks good. Now sometimes when I'm talking to myself, the director asks me to repeat what I said for the show. It's 10.5 inches right here.
Kevin, say it again.
That's 10.5 inches between these two lights here. So we'll just repeat this measurement on the other side. Now laying out the lights on the top of the cab is not really rocket science. To tell you the truth, sometimes this job is a bit of a pressure cooker with a lot going on at one time. And more than once, it's manifested itself right towards the camera. Following the profile of the sheet metal style line on the front of the cab, we're going to go 6 inches from the style line to the placement of the light. Now, sometimes we goof off a little just to break the tension, but the truth is this is kind of serious stuff because you don't want to damage the paint. So layout is really important on a lot of levels. Now this first initial hole is to feed the power wire down through the sheet metal. The rest of the placement, well, it can be adjusted and fine-tuned on a smaller level. By the way, the headliner is out of the vehicle, so we don't have to worry about damaging that. We've got a 1/4 inch hole with a rubber grommet that's going to go inside it. The grommets came from Industrial Depot, and the RTV sealant is Loctite. Now between the grommet and the RTV, we've got a weatherproof and waterproof seal, and it also allows the light to sit flush so we can fine-tune the final placement. Each marker light in the LMC kit comes with its own screws. One screw is connected to the ground and grounds the light chassis to the sheet metal of the cab, completing the circuit. We'll seal that from the bottom later on. Now, technically, these are actually clearance lights, but for us, they just flat out make it look like the true F350 dually that it is, complete with a diesel engine.
Now these are completely custom dually fenders because Ford didn't make a dually in this body style pickup truck. So when it came time to pick out some fender lights, well, we couldn't just go to a catalog and pick up some 79 Ford dually lights. They don't exist. So what we did do is we went to Summit Racing and picked up some of these 99 to 07 Super Duty LED fender lights. They're kind of small and they're oval, so they ought to blend in pretty well with our rounded off fenders. Now, out of the box, these lights are clear with a bright silver reflector, and they stood out a little bit too much. So what we did was mute their appearance a little bit with a couple of coats of Duplicolor Nightshades lens paint. And that way, they'll blend in pretty well with our fenders. Now, just like the lights on the roof of the truck, we want our fender lights to be symmetrical. So we've got a bar going across the top of the bed rails that I measured down from, and we measured out from the style line about 5 inches and marked our hole. Then it was simply a matter of drilling a hole large enough for the base of the light to pass through. To do that, we're using 2 different step bits. You can use a regular old drill bit to accomplish the same thing, but a step bit works really good on thin sheet metal at creating a nice, clean opening. And since we exposed some bare steel on our fresh paint job, or relatively fresh paint job, we went ahead and sealed up the metal just with a little bit of touch-up paint. That way, we don't have any rust running down our fenders. Now the lights on the Super Duties, well, they sit horizontal, but on our rounded fender, it's not gonna fly. So we just made them vertical, and they'll look fine. And remember, the amber lights go to the front of the fender, the red lights go to the rear. Also make sure the paint is clean so the double-sided tape will stick.
Hey, welcome back. Well, if you're just catching up with us, obviously we're back on Project Super Dually, and it feels great to have this thing almost road ready. Now, the last time we were under the hood, we showed you the new Air Raid cold air intake, which works perfectly for the different confinements and space configurations of both vehicles being mashed up together. And we also talked about the need to isolate the heat from the air intake charge from things like the turbo and the manifold and the smaller underhood area that's going to force hot air into the engine. Well, we have found a great solution for that. Check this out. The manifold shield and turbo blanket come from a company called Heat Shield Products, and we picked them up from summitracing.com. They're made specifically for the stock 12-valve Cummins turbo diesel and come in a couple of different finishes. But they're both designed to reduce underhood temperatures as much as 50%. Now, Heat Shield Products doesn't just have stuff for diesel trucks. They've got an entire product line that covers just about every need you could imagine for thermal insulation, including some pretty cool solutions for in and around the shop that come in really handy. Now, as far as power needs go, Super Dually has the standard dual battery configuration that you find on most passenger diesel trucks. And we were going to go with this until we found out about a product that replaces both of these batteries in a diesel truck with just one battery. Pretty cool. The lead-acid battery was invented in 1859, and it's been the standard battery for cars and trucks, well, as long as you and I can remember. But just because it's always been what was used doesn't necessarily mean that there's not something better. In fact, there is something better. This is the Never Die battery, and it's a lithium battery. And despite weighing in at only 19 pounds, this is not a mock-up, this is the actual battery. This battery will outperform 2 lead-acid batteries in the truck, give back-to-back restarts, and a whole lot more features. A lithium battery is 99% charge efficient. That simply means it has more stored energy available that is easier to recharge and reproduce. This is totally redesigned battery technology, and with our dually, it gives us a 90-pound weight savings over traditional dual lead-acid batteries. Now, since there's no lead in this battery, there's no need for lead terminals. Lead is a very non-conductive metal. It's about 7% conductive. These aluminum terminals, well, aluminum is 65% conductive. So it's going to get the energy out of the battery into your vehicle a lot more effectively. Now, this right here is the Never Die feature. If for some reason you run your battery down with the stereo or the winch, all you have to do is hit the power reserve button and it'll get you back started again to where the alternator can kick in and get you out of trouble. So essentially, the Never Die, well, it's got a reserve tank, and that can help out big time. Now, you may or may not know this, but it typically takes about 20 minutes for a lead-acid battery to recover after a single start. With the Never Die, it's about 5 minutes. So you can see where that benefit would kick in if you're having trouble starting on a cold day or something like that. Now, a full battery discharge, typical battery, you're looking at a trickle charger for a day, sometimes longer than that. With this, it's an hour, maybe a little bit better than an hour. Speaking of chargers, they also have several different battery chargers to suit the battery and to suit the need, whether it's RV, whether it's marine, whether it's ATV, high-performance car, whatever. Check out their website and learn about the battery chargers. And by the way, if you think this is some fragile high-tech device, think again. This battery is tested up to 150 Gs. That's 150 Gs of impact without failure. And if you're putting your car through that, we've got different things to think about than the battery surviving. Well, let's see how it works in the dually. Even though it's a big, heavy, torquey, powerful diesel, losing a little bit of front end weight, well, it never hurts. Just keep in mind that when you're losing a second battery, you've got a ground circuit that you've got to complete. We had to ground our engine block back to the chassis. Now, the battery trays in the old Ford were rusted out, so we got 2 more from LMC truck, but probably send this one back. The Never Die batteries come in a bunch of different configurations and sizes, both for physical size and for power output. So you can go to their website and find one that'll suit your vehicle.
Ready? Yep.
Yeah, go for it.
It's alive! It's alive!
Hey guys, welcome back to the shop. Now, we finally got our big diesel fired up, and we're in the process of getting it drivable. And that means combining the Dodge chassis harness with the Ford lighting. Now, one tool that makes that a lot easier for us is the Power Probe hook. We don't have to have separate wiring diagrams for the Dodge and for the Ford to combine the harnesses. We can use our Power Probe hook and its smart tip to help identify the circuits, whether it's a ground circuit, high beam, low beam, marker light, whatever. You don't have to come in here and change the dial on your multimeter to figure it out. Just touch the tip to the circuit and it tells you what's going on. Now, one other cool feature, check this out. Now, the cab light kit that Kevin installed came with its own rocker switch and wiring and all that mess. But we want to keep things simple and just tie the cab light wiring into the existing Dodge marker light circuit. But we don't want to overload the circuit doing so and powering up these 5 additional lights. Now, you guys may or may not know that you can use the hook to power up and energize circuits for testing purposes with the push of a button. Powered all 5 of them up, and it even shows us that we're only drawing 1.1 amps by powering up these 5 lights. So we're well within the margin of error. We can add a 1 amp draw to our existing circuit and know that we're not going to pop a fuse every time we turn the headlights on. Now, we wanted to show you the amp draw difference between the filament style bulbs on the cab and the LED style lights that we've got here in the fender. Now, keep in mind, the hook is attached to the battery at the front of the truck, and we've got plenty of slack in the power leads all the way here at the back. Now, we had a 1.1 amp draw for our filament style bulbs, and for the fender lights, we've got only 60 milliamps. It's a pretty stark contrast. Now, say you need to energize something that takes a little bit more power. Well, the hook can do that too. So you've got an electric fan on a 30 amp circuit and it's intermittently popping fuses. You replace the fuse and it's good to go for a little while until it pops again and it drives you crazy. Well, you can use the hook to power the fan up and monitor the amp draw. Now, our fan is only pulling 5 amps. It's obviously in good shape. Maybe the one giving you a headache spikes to 35 amps on first startup, or after it runs for a while and gets hot, pulls too many amps. Well, you've quickly and accurately diagnosed the problem, replace the faulty part, and you move on. Now, the hook has an adjustable circuit breaker. It goes anywhere from 2 up to 65 amps. That's pretty impressive out of a small little tool like this, making this a nice tool to have in the toolbox. Hey guys, welcome back to the shop. Well, Project Super Dually is really coming along. We've got our clearance lights installed, a fresh battery dropped down in this thing, and it starts and runs and moves around the shop at least underneath its own power. Now, we've done a little bit of work merging the Dodge wiring harness with the Ford lights, but when it came time to put the lenses on the lights, we fished through a few boxes and well, this is what we found. Lenses that are broken, beat up, and all in all, in rough shape.
Now, even if the lenses themselves weren't beat up, look at the difference in the color in the new ones we got from LMC Truck. Not to mention that the new ones are going to look great up against the new paint. Once we have these things installed, they're going to give us the safety and visibility that this truck had when it was brand new.
Now, some of you guys may even notice we've got the third brake light from the 97 Dodge grafted into our 79, just in case you couldn't see this giant truck stopping with just 2 brake lights.
Now, bringing this truck more into a modern era are the LED marker lights on the fenders and the high visibility halogen headlights in the grille, which helps to blend the vintage styling and modern technology.
Today, we're cleaning up the interior and protecting the exterior on Project Super Dually. Inside, we're reviving the door panels and adding new carpet. Outside, we're adding some serious custom-built bumpers. It's all today here on Trucks.
Hey, welcome to the shop. Well, there's a saying that's pretty common around the hot rodding world, and that is the last 20% of the project takes 80% of the time. And that's pretty much where we are with Project Super Dually. And one of those time sponges is, well, quite frankly, the interior. But the good news is that all the gauge cluster, all the electrical systems, well, they're all hooked up and they're all functioning perfectly. Now, the truck, just like the dashboard, is this hybrid mashup of 2 different vehicles. The dash uses the steel stamped housing for the original cab because that's what fits in there. But the cluster fit into this plastic bezel that came from the Dodge truck. And of course you saw us join them together with a bonding adhesive, but since then I've finished it with some filler, used a textured paint and some Duplicolor semi-gloss black to make it look like a stamped steel piece. The vents over here, well, they're the original Ford ones, and we just sort of gave them a shot of paint and they're going to blend in just fine. This dash pad, it's obvious that it's new. Here's why it's new. This is the original dash pad from the old Ford truck, and as you can see, it's pretty beat up. The brow's messed up, and look at all the cracks. It's just rotten. Each one of those cracks represents, about an hour's worth of repair. So it just made more sense to us to reach into the LMC truck catalog and order a brand new one. Now, speaking of the LMC truck catalog, there is a lot of interior components from those guys for this truck. Check it out. Now, there's absolutely no doubt in our mind, and probably yours by now, that this truck was a work truck. Now, if the four-door cab didn't give it away, well, the condition of the interior probably should. It was abused, and that's okay for a work truck, but we're trying to revive it. These trim panels, they're kind of beyond it. They're busted up, they're dry rotted, cracks, they're just not worth saving. So thanks to LMC Truck, we've got direct replacements, at least for the front doors. Now, for the rear, we've kind of got a bit of a problem because the rear doors are odd. They're a little bit narrower and, well, frankly, nobody pops reproduction panels because they're just such limited production that nobody makes them. So we're gonna do a little bit of repair and save what we got. Now, these are the rear door interior trim panels, and actually they're not in bad shape, but we had to do a small repair here. We just used some 2-part epoxy, repaired the backside where the crack was, and it's good to go. Now, this looks a lot cleaner than this guy here. This is how it came out of the box after being torn down, and it needs to be prepped. As you can see, it's prepped very well, and this is what we end up with. It looks like a brand new one, and that's thanks to this vinyl and plastic dye from LMC Truck. It's called Color Bond, and, well, it matches the color of the OE trim panels that we got from LMC, and it sprays on beautifully, makes them look brand new. Now, typically, when you prep, you use a scuffing pad, you can get in all the cracks and crevices, but look at all the lines, look at all the tight spots in here. You're not gonna stuff this in here, and it's gonna take hours and hours and hours to prep this. So we found a way to prep this stuff that's non-invasive, that gets absolutely a great job done of all the cracks and crevices, and it's really, really easy to do, very time efficient too. So if you or your buddy has a bead blast cabinet with some aluminum oxide or glass beads, well, you can make short work of this stuff. Here's how. Now, the blast cabinet nor the media really cares what you're doing with it, so reduce your pressure down to about 20 pounds and you can safely blast this plastic without eating it up. You can see the short work that it makes of getting rid of all the schmutz in the top layer of that textured plastic. This trim panel took about 15 minutes to blast and about 5 minutes to blow the dust out of the cracks. Once that was done, well, you're ready to go. It's prepped. So I'm putting on 3 fairly substantial coats of the Color Bond paint and letting it dry for about an hour, probably an hour and a half. Make sure it's good and dry to the touch and that it won't roll off on your fingers. Now, in any restoration job, you're gonna find stuff that you just missed. And the good thing about the Color Bond interior paint is that it's easy to use and requires minimal prep, and you don't have to set up a paint booth to use it. To install your door trim panels requires push-pin type clips. On the rear doors, they're a spring steel clip. On the front doors, they come with the LMC trim panels. Ours, since they were steel, were reusable. Got a little slap happy putting them in, but after a while, finally listened to what I was saying. Now, the door pulls received the same treatment as the trim panels, except for the chrome ends, which we wanted to keep chrome. The fasteners are hidden by a push-in cover, and the door pulls as well as the window cranks were in good enough shape to save. We just cleaned them up with a little steel wool and some metal polish from Mother's. And with this door completely finished, it's one more thing off the list for Super Dually. Hey. Welcome back. Well, test fit and mock-up is critical when you're building a vehicle, especially a custom vehicle where there's several different things at play, and the interior is no exception. For us, we've got LMC Truck on our side and the carpet availability, even for this oddball truck with a club cab. We've got the rear carpet section with the footwells, and it's combined with the jute backing. So with the jute, with the nice carpet, and the lizard skin spray ceramic insulation we've already got laid down on this floor, we should be good to go. And it's just a simple matter of doing a little bit of trimming, making sure the footwells and everything lines up, which we're good to go here. But the front section with the new Dodge shifter and the pedals and a couple of other things that we got to account for, such as where it comes up into the toe boards, well, I've got some trimming, some measuring, and some trimming, and some measuring, and some trimming, and some measuring, some trimming, and some measuring, and some trimming, and measuring.
All right, while Kevin's been doing some interior work and cutting and measuring carpet, I've been building some custom bumpers for our Super Dually, because ordering a pair of them out of a catalog just isn't going to work. They're either going to fit the Ford body or the Dodge frame. They're not going to fit both, so we had to make our own. And we started with this cardboard template. After mocking things up in cardboard, we transferred those measurements over to our Torchmate CNC plasma cutter, which made quick work of cutting out the plates. Now we realize you probably don't have one of these Torchmates at your shop or your disposal, but you can get the same job done with a magic marker, a straight edge, and a bandsaw, or even a cutoff wheel on your angle grinder. It'll just take a little bit longer. Now we're going to incorporate a step into the rear bumper, and these dimple-dyed holes will add a little bit of traction, style, and strength to this otherwise flat piece of 1/8" steel. Then it's time to weld all this mess together. And so we don't concentrate the heat in one area of the bumper too much, we welded around the bumper in different areas in 4 to 6 inch beads. Same with the grinding. And after all that cutting and welding, here's what we ended up with. We made this front bumper out of 3/16 plate steel. We've got cutout holes for fog lights and cutout oblong holes in the center to help with airflow. All right, now for the rear bumper, it's more of the same. Mostly 3/16 plate steel, except for the step portion where we used 1/8" plate just because it was easier to bend and work with. Now, most of it is MIG welded and ground down, but this weld here, well, we went ahead and TIG welded it because it would have been difficult to get a grinder in there to smooth it down and make it look nice. We've also added a couple of holes for license plate lights. As you saw, we added a couple of dozen dimple die holes for a little bit of traction on our step. And since this is a work truck and we're going to be dragging a trailer pretty often, well, we obviously needed a trailer hitch. So we went to Summit Racing and picked up this V5 rated hitch. It'll allow us to drag a trailer up to 10,000 pounds or 12,000 if we've got a weight distribution hitch on it. Now, just like everything else on this truck, it had to be modified to fit. So we cut the center loose from the end plates, moved it up, and tucked it in a little bit so it fit our frame a little bit better. What is it? Lift with your back, not your knees? Is that one?
I'd rather lift with your back. That looks good, man. Cool. All right. I'm not gonna fall off now.
All right, now with the front bumper installed, you can see that these openings aren't just to break up the design of the bumper. They're going to be functional once we trim this lower grill shell. Now that'll allow air to flow through here, off this little sheet metal panel, and cool the bottom of the AC condenser, intercooler, and radiator, helping this work truck run nice and cool. Now we've left enough space down here for a truck's tag, and we'll be able to throw some fog lights in here once we do a little bit more trimming of that grill shell. But needless to say, well, we're plenty psyched how this bumper turned out.
Hey, welcome back. Well, what a difference a carpet kit makes into the interior of a vehicle. This thing looks like a brand new truck again. And as well as the 2-piece carpet kit, we also have kick panels to install. Want to bring your attention to something else. These are the pockets that go underneath the door trim panel on the front doors. Well, you know what? See ya. Worn out, not gonna happen. Since the 2-piece carpet ended here, we had a lot of extra left over. So thanks, LMC. What you've just given us is the ability to make a nice upholstered panel to go under that trim panel. Here's another thing that we got. These threshold panels are brand new. They're available for the F-150 as well as this club cab truck. But the transitions on the back, well, not so much. But here's where our buddies from Mothers come in handy. This is their metal polish, a little bit of steel wool, backed up by a microfiber, and voila. We make our old thresholds and transitions look just as good as the new ones. Since these aren't available, well, thanks, Mothers. Kind of saved our butt.
Now, we made our bumpers out of hot rolled steel, and with that hot rolled steel comes this grayish mill scale. That's a slick, kind of hard to remove surface that's difficult to get paint to stick to. Now, if these were just Jeep bumpers, well, we wouldn't worry about it. They need touch up anyway from getting beat up on the rocks. But for this truck, well, we wanted the paint to stick for a good long time. And luckily, we've got a blast cabinet large enough to stuff this entire bumper into, and we can sandblast the mill scale away. It's really one of the most effective ways to do so. Now, there's also chemicals you can use to try to strip it off. But if you don't have a blast cabinet and you don't want to fool around with chemicals, well, we wanted to show you 5 different ways to try to mechanically remove this mill scale with varying levels of success. You can pick out which works best for you. Now, the first thing we're going to try is a wire brush attachment on our 4.5-inch Matco angle grinder. And while this tool is usually pretty effective at removing undercoating and crud, it doesn't do anything but polish the surface. Next up was a pneumatic die grinder with a medium grit reconditioning or resurfacing disc on it. And again, with the same results. Just made the metal shiny. Then we moved on to a medium grit sanding disc on a pneumatic grinder. And this started out looking pretty promising. The disc was making quick work of removing the scale. But things kind of went downhill after that, as the paper quickly clogged up with the tough mill scale, and it was just kind of rubbing on the metal and polishing it. But at least we were on the right path. Then it was back to the angle grinder and a coarse 40 grit flap wheel from Industrial Depot. This started out looking pretty good too. Due to the layers in the flap wheel and the overall grit of the flap wheel, we were making pretty good progress. It wasn't doing too much damage to our flap wheel. This could get the job done. Then we tried a stripping disc. That's not something we use around the shop that often, but it is pretty effective. And if you're wondering what a stripping disc is made of, well, it's basically individual abrasive grains interspersed throughout an open web of nylon fibers. Now, I think the stripping disc does the best job. It removes the mill scale without creating 40 grit scratches everywhere. And now all I got to do is finish stripping it so Kevin can paint it.
Hey, welcome back. Well, Super Dually is close enough to being road ready where it was time to discuss wheels, because simulators on the old steel wheels were not going to cut it. So we gave the guys at Nashville Wheel Company a call, talked about some designs, and this is what they sent over. Check it out. This is a super strong forged and polished 19.5 with standard width. It was custom cut by Greening Auto Company, comes with a billet aluminum center cap, and they even took the time to mill in the Super Dually project name. Now, it's not just the fronts. We had them send us the whole set of 6. And the rear wheels, well, they're polished just as perfectly as the fronts. Got a cool center cap, and again, they milled in the project name for us so they can offer you the same custom features. Now, a 19.5 is big enough to look modern, but still gives us enough sidewall to where we can actually put this truck to work and have a smooth ride. But for you guys that want larger sizes, check these out. NWC offers wheels up to 26 inches in diameter. So you can go to the Nashville Wheel Company website and either order off-the-shelf pre-designed wheels or work hand in hand with them like we did and come up with your own design. These wheels are 100% American made, and they even offer matching trailer wheels. So go to NashvilleWheelCompany.com, check them out. The prices may even surprise you.
Today, we're finally taking Project Super Dually out on the road.
I expected it to be a little bit more 1979 and a little less 1997.
But first, we're updating steering components, doing a wheel alignment, and fixing our instrument cluster.
And now, 0.2 ohms, that's perfect.
Then we're hitting the highways and the byways to see if all our years of hard work have really combined a 79 F350 body and a 97 Dodge frame into one really cool working tow rig. It's all today here on Truck Tech.
Hey guys, welcome to Truck Tech. Well, the day is finally here to take Project Super Dually out for a test drive. Now, we've been working on our hybrid 97 Dodge chassis, 79 Ford bodied work truck for quite some time now. And there's only a few things left to do before we can take this thing out and see how it drives and how it tows. Now, there's no doubt about it, this was a very ambitious project that required a lot of work. But in the end, we got a cool and unique work truck that I'm itching to test drive. But like I said, we've got a couple of things to do first. The steering linkage on our dually was original to the donor truck. And by looking at all the mud and crud on this thing, well, it looked like it lived a pretty rough life. And the wear in the steering linkage indicates that as well. So we're gonna replace all of it. Now the idler arm was the main offender, but we had some play in some of the tie rod ends as well. And any play in the steering linkage can affect an alignment, and you can't get a good alignment until you get that stuff taken care of. Now to remove the pitman arm, we're using a puller from Matco. We'll preload this thing a little bit and give it a couple of wraps with a hammer. Now our puller's a good quality tool, but if you're borrowing from the local parts store, quality may not be up to snuff, and you can help save the tool by applying a little bit of preload and hitting it lightly with a hammer to break it free. Now our replacement steering parts came from LMC Truck. We picked up a new pitman arm, idler arm, inner and outer tie rod ends, and adjustment sleeves. But we are reusing our original center link. It's nothing but a solid chunk of metal, not a wear item. We're also reusing our original steering stabilizer because it appears to be in good shape. Now these adjustment sleeves, sometimes you can salvage them from your original linkage, but more often than not, the threads are gummed up and they've seen some corrosion. So we picked up new ones. I also applied a little bit of anti-seize to the threads, not only to fend off corrosion, but to make adjustments that much smoother. Now you can install these parts on the truck one piece at a time, but I like to do it on a bench top so I can install it as an assembly. Now, some of these parts came painted, some didn't, but I did take the time to paint the ones that weren't. And before I threw away the old worn-out steering linkage, I went ahead and matched up the length of the tie rod assemblies so we'll have a minimal amount of adjusting to do once we get everything installed. Now most of these rod ends come pre-greased, but it's always a good idea to add a couple of more shots of grease before you hit the road. Now, after replacing steering parts, you probably already know the next step is to have an alignment done. And we've showed you guys how to use a couple of tape measures to rough in the toe and alignment so you can limp to the local alignment shop and have them finish things up. But if you can replace your own steering linkage parts, well, you're probably capable of doing your own alignments if you've got the right tool. These quick trick alignment tools really simplify the process of the alignment. They attach to the wheel so you can measure the 3 alignment variables: caster, camber, and toe, by using the wheel mounts, level, and supplied tape measures. I like the fact that it clears the dually wheel stick out, and by doing it ourselves, we don't risk the guy at the alignment shop damaging our rather expensive custom wheels. All right, now once you have the fixtures attached to both front wheels, you can use the supplied gauge or level, attach it to the fixture, and go through the process of rotating the wheel a certain number of degrees to get your caster reading. To measure camber, you're using the same gauge, and you don't even have to have a level working surface. Simply set it on the ground in front of the tire you're working on, zero the gauge out, and it takes any slope into consideration when making the camber measurement. To measure toe, we simply use the tape measures supplied and put them in the slots before and after the wheel, compare the difference, and if you have to make any adjustments, we simply rotate those tie rod adjustment sleeves to get it to where you want it. Once we get this thing dialed in, we finally get to hit the road.
Up next, we've got just one more fix to make.
All right. Less than 1 ohm of resistance. That's pretty good for a liquid.
And later, Super Dually finally hits the road.
Hey guys, welcome back to Truck Tech. Now we got our alignment finished up. We're just about ready to hit the road. But after turning the key on and firing up the engine, I noticed one last nagging problem that I'm gonna need this to fix. All right, with the engine running, it's pretty evident that the oil pressure and fuel level gauges are functioning correctly, but the tach, voltmeter and water temp gauges are not. Here's what I did to diagnose the problem. Now, the voltmeter is the simplest to diagnose. As long as you've got system voltage going into it and a ground connection on the other side, well, it should function correctly. Now, pin number 8, the green and yellow wire, is our battery or system voltage point. And we're good, we got 12.38 volts. So we switch the meter over to a continuity test, attach the other lead to a good known chassis ground, and complete the test. And it's pretty obvious, we've got a good connection. All right, well, now that we know the problem is isolated to the instrument cluster, let's take a closer look. Now, on the back of the instrument cluster is the printed circuit, or the circuit board for the instrument cluster. And these squiggly lines are called traces, and they're what carry the current to the bulbs or gauges. Now, this is what a good trace is supposed to look like. It's basically a flattened copper wire laminated in plastic. This trace here obviously has some problems. There's definitely a continuity issue here. This one, well, looks like it needs some repair as well. Here's another bad one right here, and it's the main power supply for a lot of the bulbs that aren't functioning. Now, to fix this stuff, you've got a few different options, and none of them are that complicated. All you're trying to do is essentially complete the circuit where it's partially damaged. Now, in between these two terminals, there's no continuity. We've got a dead spot here in the trace, so we're going to fix it with a simple jumper wire. Our little red jumper wire is basically just providing an alternate current path. And now, 0.2 ohms, that's perfect. Another option is this rear window defroster repair kit. This is a conductive liquid that brushes on, and when it dries, it acts very similar to a wire. A little fine line tape will keep me from painting outside the lines. Now, this spot does have continuity, but it's clearly been damaged, so we're just going to reinforce it. First, get rid of the plastic, get down to the copper. We just want to isolate this trace from the others. Now, the other traces are laminated in plastic and somewhat protected, but I want to keep the repair confined to this area. And give it a few coats and we should be good. A little extra material will make sure that the repair can handle the current load. Now, the repair in this burned up spot is definitely a little bit more aggressive. This is asking a lot of the liquid, but we'll see how it does. I'm probably being a little excessive here, but it's got to carry current, so I'm going to give it the best shot it can. Now, the repair's not the most aesthetically pleasing, but in this case, it's definitely function over form. All right. Less than 1 ohm of resistance. That's pretty good for a liquid. And just like insulation protects a copper wire, a little bit of clear packing tape will help protect our repair and give us the best chance at success. All right, now parts of that repair weren't that pretty, but it's hard to argue with results. Check it out, we've got bulbs lighting up that we didn't have before, and our gauges are working. Pretty cool. And it sure beats forking over about $300 for a remanufactured cluster. Mission accomplished.
When we come back, it's payoff time for Project Super Dually. Stick around.
Hey guys, welcome back to Truck Tech, where we're finally getting some seat time in this monster of a truck, Project Super Dually. Love that turbo whistle. Man, after working hard on this thing for a few years, off and on again, it sure feels good to get some seat time, finally. I'm actually really surprised how smooth this thing is riding down the highway. I expected it to be a little bit more 1979 and a little less 1997. Tires and wheels must have balanced out good. There's no wheel shimmy, no brake shimmy. A little bit extra wind noise, but can't have it all, right? Now, these 12-valve Cummins engines are all mechanically controlled. There's no tuner, no electronics. So if you want to make modifications or upgrades, you've got to get your hands dirty. But they're really fun to tinker with, and they respond to modifications really well. The power gains are really impressive.
The few minor bolt-on modifications we made to this truck really woke it up. The fuel plate, governor springs, allows the engine to rev and gives it plenty of fuel. Let that turbo do its job. Our diesel engine is backed up by an NV4500 5-speed manual transmission. I know some guys prefer to tow with an automatic, but I actually prefer to tow with a manual. I feel it gives me more control. And you're not looking at a $3,000 or $4,000 overhaul bill when it comes time for a rebuild. Put a good clutch in it, like the South Bend clutch we put in, and call it done. We've also fixed the 5th gear nut issue that plagues these transmissions, so we should be good to go on maintenance for quite some time. Got the turbo spooled up. All right, now our enclosed trailer is empty. You guys that tow a lot know enclosed trailers, well, half of it is wind resistance, not necessarily the weight that's inside of it. So it's a pretty good representation of a loaded down trailer. Eddie doesn't know we got a Cummins under the hood. Now who's got the cooler truck? His is quieter, rides smoother, probably a little bit nicer, but ours is cooler, hands down. Our crew cab truck isn't very common, but it will hold 4 people and some gear, as long as they're not NBA players. Now there's no doubt it won't compete with a late model mega cab for creature comforts, but it's still a nice truck and kind of hard to find. Our aluminum wheels are from Nashville Wheel Company, and it's a great modern twist of a classic dually style. And they're wrapped in commercial grade rubber. That ought to last over 100,000 miles. They might ride a little rough compared to most light truck tires, but that's the trade-off you get with such durability. Now the interior of this truck got freshened up as well. It's got new carpet, a new headliner, and the mashup Ford and Dodge dash. The front seats are out of the Dodge as well, but the rear is the stock Ford bench that Kevin just applied a little gray dye to closely match the rest of the gray in the interior. And it turned out pretty good. This thing rides really good, just like my 94 Dodge does. I thought the body would make it ride a little bit rough or add some extra wind noise, but so far so good. Must have did pretty good on the alignment. Tracking pretty straight. No wheel shimmy, wheel straight ahead. Yes, sir. This has got to be one of my favorite body styles of all time. This makes for a cool tow and work rig. See how much boost we make here. The 4th gear, a little bit of load. All right, got boost, got it all spooled up, making 30 pounds of boost. EGTs are in check. Rolling like a freight train. Now these Dodge trucks have an overkill cooling system. It's definitely working on this truck. 90 degrees out, AC on, running nice and cool. Looks like we did pretty good on the engine adjustments too. We're not getting a lot of extra black smoke. No point in wasting fuel. Our crew cab dually from the 70s is definitely one of a kind. It can haul 4 people and a house down the road. And with the blue and gray 2-tone paint job and the diesel under the hood, our super dually is 100% American awesomeness. Hey guys, welcome back to the shop. Now today was definitely a good day. It always feels really good to put the wraps on a long-term project and have a successful day out on the road testing things out. Now on a big ambitious project like this, usually by the time you get to the end of it, there's a few things you wish you would have done a little bit differently. This truck's no exception. The air conditioning was working great, but it could use some help from some tinted windows. And these side view mirrors, they look cool,
But while towing, I do wish I had a little bit more rearward visibility. These are minor changes and easy fixes. Now, we've done some cool and unique projects over the years, but this one seems to have gotten the most attention. I think people just dig the body style of this truck. Speaking of which, having a 79 Ford crew cab body sitting on top of a 97 Dodge chassis gives us modern suspension, brakes, and drivetrain. So it's the best of both worlds. And in the end, well, Truck Tech ends up with a very cool, very unique, one-of-a-kind work truck. And the fact that we didn't drop 40 or 50 grand on it makes it even better.